You wake to the pale light of early morning pressing through the warped glass of a narrow window. The air inside your small room is still, a faint chill lingering from the night. You dress slowly, feeling the rough weave of linen against your skin, and push open the wooden shutters. Outside, the cobblestone street stretches away in both directions, its uneven surface damp from last night's rain. Each stone is darkened and slick, the water pooling in shallow dips. You step out and feel the coolness rising from the ground, the dampness of the air clinging faintly to your face. The first breath you draw is layered. There is the freshness of rain still caught in the gaps between stones. But it is not alone. Something more sour threads through it, faint yet inescapable, as if the rainwater has coaxed hidden odors up from the gutters. The town is still waking. Doors remain shut, save for a few shutters thrown open to catch the morning air. A woman across the way sweeps her stoop, the bristles of her broom pushing aside fallen leaves, each stroke releasing a faint, earthy smell. You walk slowly, the sound of your steps softened by the wetness of the ground. The narrow street funnels the scents along its length. You catch the faint tang of ash, so fine it lingers after the fires have gone cold, mixed with the smell of soaked timber. The stone walls, worn smooth by time, seem to hold their own scent, a mineral dampness that rises when touched by rain. Historians note that the porous limestone used in much of the town's building held moisture for days, releasing it back into the air in a way that changed the smell of the streets after wet weather. Some say the odor of old stone is neutral, but you find it layered with memories of everything that has touched it: wood smoke, candle soot, and centuries of rain. A fringe account once claimed that such dampness could affect mood, making townsfolk slower to rise on rainy mornings. Though evidence for this remains thin and elusive, historians still argue whether the rhythm of a town's mornings was truly shaped by its building materials, or whether people simply adjusted their pace according to the weather. A cart rolls slowly past, its wooden wheels sending faint ripples across the surface of puddles. The driver nods but says nothing, his breath a pale wisp in the cool air. Behind him, the faint smell of hay drifts from the cart bed, blending briefly with the other scents before the rain reclaims them. You pause near the corner where the street narrows, leaning slightly toward the center to peer down the lane ahead. The damp stones glisten there too, each reflecting the first thin light of the day, each holding the mingled fragrances of a town that has known countless mornings like this. You follow the damp lane until the first warm breath of morning meets you like a steady hand to the chest. It is the bakery ahead, shutters half lifted, a stripe of gold light sliding across the stones. The air turns softer as you approach, the chill thinning, the scent growing thicker: warm dough, wet yeast, and the faint caramel edge where crust will soon darken. You stand a moment beneath the lintel to feel the difference. Behind you, the street is rain and ash. Before you, the room is oven and grain. You breathe in, slow and even, letting the warmth settle in your throat. Inside, the baker moves without hurry. He works in a rhythm as old as the neighborhood, palms guiding pale loaves into shape with small, repeated pressures. The bench is dusted white, and the dust floats when he claps his hands, a fine veil that drifts and then disappears into the bakery's heat. You watch and do not speak. He does not either. He folds, presses, turns, and each movement has a small sound: the mild thud of dough, the whisper of flour, the rasp of a wooden peel drawn against the board. The oven mouth, open like a red-brown breath, glows without showing flame. The fire has already done its early work. Now the oven radiates steady heat with a scent of old wood and stone baked dry. The first smell that reaches you is the yeast alive, a little sour and comforting in its familiarity. It reminds you of damp grain, of old beer, of something still changing even as it warms. In many towns of this time, bakers rise before most others to catch the right heat, and guild rules, or their local equivalent, set the hours and the measures for their loaves. That is the plain fact that many chronicle writers note. Bread is regulated because bread is life, and a fair loaf is a public promise. The size of a penny loaf, the price of wheaten bread when grain is scarce, the minimum weight for brown bread, these are not mysteries here. They are listed, recorded, checked, and at times argued over in the market square. A small kettle ticks on a corner hearth, and you catch another layer of scent-damp linen steaming as a cloth warms, ready to cover the shaped loaves. The baker wipes the board, drags the cloth over his forearm like a slow-moving cloud, and lays it across the waiting dough. He nods at you once, then points with his chin to the bench. You understand you may stay if you keep your silence. This pleases you. You prefer to watch work that barely seems like work. Motions so practiced they look like resting. He pulls the first batch from the oven. The crusts hum softly, tiny crackles singing as the cooler air touches them. The sound is like a whispering fire, but inverted, cooling rather than burning. The smell swells as if the room itself exhales. You can taste it on your tongue, though you have yet to eat. A sweetness like straw left to dry in high summer. A smoke note from last night's fuel. A hint of salt that sharpens the loaf's promise. The baker lines the bread on slats by the window. Outside, someone pauses. Then two more, drawn not by a call, but by the way hot bread announces itself through shutters and along stones. You think of the ingredients turning into something more than the sum of themselves. In many quarters, bakers take their leaven from the froth left by brewing barm skimmed from ale, brought in a small covered pot before dawn. Others keep a mother piece of old dough, sour and lively, torn and folded into the new. It is hard to say which scent you prefer, the ale's faint bitterness sneaking into the loaf or the rounder, quieter tang of the old dough carried forward day after day. Historians still argue whether barm-leavened bread dominated in cities while sourdough persisted in back lanes and rural ovens, or whether the two simply braided through neighborhoods according to habit, price, and luck. The record is generous with mentions, but stingy with totals. You accept the uncertainty, the way you accept steam on a cool morning present, shifting, and not yours to pin. A cat appears as if melted from shadow, winding between sacks near the wall. The baker ignores it. The cat ignores you. It sits, tail folded around paws, a small guardian of the grain. A quirky belief circulates in whispers, the sort that clings to warm places, that a well-fed bakery cat ensures a quieter oven, that mice and mischief both keep their distance when whiskers are in attendance. There is no ledger entry for this, no fine for bakers without cats, but the cat is here all the same, and you feel the room's rightness settle further. You notice the scoring knife, thin and keen, resting beside a bowl of water. When the baker removes the cloth and turns to his new loaves, he lifts the blade and draws swift, shallow lines across each surface. The cuts are not decoration alone, they are release and intention. The dough opens along the marks, rises where invited, and the oven repays care with form. Some towns require bakers to mark loaves with assign initials, a small symbol so authorities can trace a fault back to its maker. The practical runs beside the fragrant here. The smell is gentle, but the rules are firm. He loads the next batch. The long wooden peel slides like a drawn breath into the oven's mouth and out again, now empty. The door is not a door, but a movable wall of heat the baker knows by feel. He listens for the hush that means the temperature holds. You listen too, and hear only your own even breathing, and the quiet tick of crusts cooling behind you. Outside, the street carries on cartwheels and distant voices, but in here the world is measured by rise and set, by airy crumb and brown shell. The rain scent stays at the threshold, damp and patient. Inside, the bakery's breath grows heavier as the room warms. Wheat, yeast, smoke, and that faint shadow of ash that lingers no matter how clean the fire. You let the smells layer on your senses without sorting them, the way you might let slow bells overlap and fade. You are not hungry, exactly, but you feel ready. Warm bread prepares the mind to step into the day with softer edges, even when the day will not be soft. Someone knocks at the shutter. The baker passes a loaf through the gap, and a hand exchanges a coin. No words, only the sound of exchange, simple and small. The buyer lingers half a heartbeat longer than needed, as if to take one more breath of the room, and then the shutter falls back into place. The smell slips out along with the loaf, following the buyer down the lane like a friendly dog. You ease away from the bench. Your clothes carry the scent now, fine and clingy, a reminder that you have been close to heat and work and transformation. The baker nods once more, already turning to his next fold, and you step back onto the stones. The cool air takes your cheeks again. but the bakery stays with you. Behind you, the glow holds steady. Ahead, the town waits, its other smells gathering, ready to meet the warm ones you now wear. You turn down a narrow side alley where the sun has not yet found its way. The stones here stay damp longer, and the air holds a thicker note, warm and animal, steady and close. A goat lifts its head as you pass, eyes pale and level, jaw working on something that looks like yesterday's cabbage leaves. The rope that tethers it creaks against a ring set into the wall. Further in, a pair of hens rearrange straw with small, earnest kicks. A sleepy rooster blinks, measuring whether dawn deserves his voice. You move slowly, and the alley moves slowly with you. The smell is layered in a way you recognize now. Hay that once was sweet and is now tired, damp straw flattened by hooves, a tang of urine that clings to wood, and the unmistakable musk of living bodies warming the cool. You stand still and let your breathing match the alley's rhythm. The goat exhales, the rooster ruffles, the hens offer their soft, satisfied murmurs. From somewhere above, a shutter opens and closes with a hollow clap, one motion to start the day, one to guard against it. You notice the way people make a path through this close world. Someone has laid small bundles of brushwood to the side for sweeping. A bucket sits ready beneath a dripping eave. A child's hand has chalked a mark on the wall, just 2 lines, crossing perhaps to count mornings, perhaps to claim the spot. You step over a shallow runnel in the stones where water, or what passes for water, makes a thread toward the street. In many towns of this era, keeping small animals within the walls is simply part of the day's arithmetic. Eggs within reach, milk within reach, meat and fat and hides within reach. These are practical sums in a place where carts cost and pastures lie beyond gates that close at night. Ordinances exist, and you could point to them. They limit how many pigs or goats may be kept, when they may wander, where they must be tethered, and how far from the well they must stay. But rules share the alley with rope and habit. The fact remains plain. Livestock and town life are entwined, and their smells braid through the lanes as surely as voices do. The goat shakes itself, and the small bell at its throat gives a tired clink. You have heard a fringe claim, half practical and half charm, that bell metal near an animal keeps bad air from settling too heavily. The argument is thin. Shaking the bell simply means the animal is noticed quickly and minded, but the bell remains, and its sound folds into the alley's waking. You look at the animal's hooves and see they have been trimmed with care. There is pride in humble things here. A sound hoof, a clean rope, a bucket rinsed at dusk. A man steps out of a door with a broom and sets to work with small, regular strokes. The straw bristles push dung and chaff into a neat line along the gutter. He hums under his breath, a tune with no lift, only even steps. When he pauses, he tilts the broom so that its dampness drips in, patient drops. He nods to you, eyes going past to check the tether once more. The alley is not his alone, but he understands that keeping it tolerable requires attention before bread, before words, before the sun arrives. You stand near a stack of hay that has taken on the alley's dampness. The smell is heavier where hay sits close to stone, woolly and green sour. A little sweet, a little stale. It is not unpleasant. It is simply full of the goat's breath and the night's air, and the small mysteries of what hay keeps when it is no longer a field. A hen hops up to the stack, pecks, and hops down again, satisfied with the day's first small victory. Higher up the lane, 2 boys carry a shallow wooden barrow between them. It holds a basket of peelings and a scoop of grain hulls. They nod, avoid the wetter patches with practiced feet, and set the basket down near the goat's reach. The animal noses the top, draws a breath as if reading the morning news, and begins to sort with patient lips. The boys watch the way a cook watches a pot, not with eagerness, but with the calm of routine. You think of the town sweepers and collectors, the men who come with larger carts to take what alleys gather. In some places, dung is not simply waste. It is currency of another kind, measured, sold, layered onto gardens. It fuels the quiet transactions of kitchen plots and fields beyond the walls. But records are uneven, and historians still argue whether the regular carting of alley waste belonged to a formal, gilded trade in every sizable town, or whether, more often, It depended on neighbors helping neighbors, and the unrecorded circuits of those who knew when to knock at which door. The truth may be both, and it may shift from year to year with the price of grain and the patience of magistrates. A small wind stirs the alley, and the smells react as leaves might. They lift a little, shift, settle differently. You catch, for a moment, the cleaner top of the rooster's feathers, a dry, dusty warmth, and then the darker undernote returns straw close to skin, damp board, a hint of the tannery 2 lanes over, arriving as a far echo. You let the moment pass. You do not sort too hard. You accept the alley as a single thing. The man with the broom now brings the bucket. He tips a little water into the gutter and uses the broom to help the thread along, coaxing it toward the street's main run. The goat steps aside, unconcerned. Water meets dung, meets ash from a hearth, meets a feather, and becomes the town's familiar mixture, never clear, never entirely foul, always itself. The scent changes again, a brief freshness, then the earthier body returns. You reach out your hand to the goat, palm down, fingers quiet. The animal leans forward, pauses, then decides your hand might be a reluctant branch. Its breath warms your skin with a faint, chewed green sweetness. Another fringe belief passes through your mind, shared by grandmothers in half-joking tones, that a goat's breath on your fingers before breakfast keeps your own hands from trembling during fine work. Whether it is charm or simply a reminder to breathe slowly, you do not say. You let the animal exhale once more and lower your hand. A woman steps into the doorway with a pail of kitchen scraps. She sorts quickly, this for the hens, that for the compost heap beyond the door, and her sorting has a smell of its own. Onion skins, stale crusts, a bruised apple, last night's herbs gone dark. The hens hurry in a soft bustle, and for a few moments the alley sings a little, a cluck, a scrape, a bell's clink, the brooms hush. Then it calms again, the way waves settle after a boat has passed. You look up, and a strip of sky shows between the roofs, a pale promise that the sun will find this place by mid-morning. When it does, some of the dampness will lift, and the alley's scent will change its coat. The animals will doze in the warmth, and their musk will become more comfortable, less insistent. For now, it is morning's version, cool, close, and honest. You pass the rooster, who decides at last that the light is adequate and offers a clean, ringing call. It carries down the stones and slides around the corner into the larger street, a bright thread pulling the town along behind it. You touch the wall as you go and feel the roughness of mortar where a hand has replaced a stone. There is a sense here that nothing is entirely finished. Rope frays and is knotted. Hay is eaten and replaced. Water runs and dries. Smell arrives and fades, then arrives again in another form. At the mouth of the alley, you pause and look back. The goat has settled. The hens have arranged themselves into tidy circles of feathers. The broom leans against the door with its bristles splayed, drying in the dim light. You take one more slow breath, letting the alley's compact world fill your chest. Animal, straw, stone, work. It is not a noble scent, nor is it cruel. It is the smell of a town that lives close to what feeds it. You step out to the street, carrying a little of it with you. The wider air is different, but the alley does not disappear. It simply follows at a respectful distance, the way a familiar song lingers after the last note. You follow the street until a thin, high sound interrupts the murmur of morning, the scrape of a pot against stone. Ahead, a servant leans from an upstairs window, tilts a rounded clay chamber pot, and empties its contents into the gutter below. The splash is unhurried, as if this were not waste but simply water passing through its next shape. The smell rises immediately, mingling with the damp air, heavier than the bread, sharper than the goat's alley. You step aside with the instinct of someone who knows the timing of such mornings. The liquid threads along the gutter slope, carrying with it what the night held. The stones guide it toward the street's center, where a wider runnel waits to take it further down. This is not an accident of paving. In many Renaissance towns, the central gutter is designed precisely for this work. That is, the fact the records agree on gutters are part of the street's architecture, as deliberate as walls or doors. Rain, waste, and spilled ale share the same shallow course. The street's slope is its quiet instruction. telling everything where to go. A boy in a leather cap steps into view with a short-handled broom. He works along the runnel with quick strokes, chasing the liquid along before it settles too much in one place. He wears a cloth across his mouth, not in the way of a grand physician, but tied loosely like a scarf. Whether it keeps the smell at bay or simply gives him something of his own to breathe, you cannot tell. A fringe notion says that a cloth steeped in vinegar could shield one from the worst of the morning air. The boy's cloth shows no sign of such steeping, but the thought lingers. You stand to the side and watch the water's path. Here it picks up a sprig of herb, there a splinter of wood, further along the thin ash from a hearth. The street becomes a small river, its banks cobbled, its traffic slow. A hen dips her head to peck at something in the flow, decides against it, and hops to a dry spot. A dog arrives moments later, less cautious, and laps twice before trotting away. The smell shifts with each new contribution, now sharper with urine, now softened by a clump of rotting leaves. Above, the servant leans out to shake the pot's rim with a practiced flick, sending the last drops free. She rests the pot on the sill to dry in the pale light. The pot's inside is glazed, smooth enough to clean easily, but the rim is rough where the glaze has thinned. You think of the dozens of times this motion repeats each week, each season, each year. Historians still argue whether the frequency of such emptying varied much between households of different means, or whether necessity leveled habits so that noble and common chamber pots met the gutter with equal regularity. The records speak in ordinances and fines, but the lived rhythm is quieter, more stubborn than the ink suggests. You notice the boy's broom, a bundle of twigs bound tight to a short stick, the binding wound with cord darkened by wet use. The handle's end is polished by the palm. He pushes, stops, kicks a stone from the runnel, pushes again. He is not hurrying. The town is not yet fully awake. His work is to keep the flow moving until the next rain, or until the cart collectors arrive. If he leaves it too long, the smell thickens, the flies come, and complaints travel faster than the water. A cart approaches, iron-banded wheels clinking on the stones. Its driver keeps to the side, avoiding the runnel where possible. The cart is empty for now, its boards clean, perhaps waiting to collect grain sacks or barrels from the market. The horse breathes heavily as it passes, steam curling from its nostrils in the cool air. That warmth for a moment overtakes the gutter's scent, but as the cart moves on, the balance shifts back. You crouch to see the way the water curls around uneven stones. In some places, the cobbles have settled lower, forming small eddies where lighter debris spins before continuing. You think of how these stones are set without mortar, their weight and shape holding them together, their gaps allowing water to pass. The gutter is not a perfect machine, but it works because it is part of every streetwalker's sense of place. Step here, not there. Keep your skirts closed. Lift your boots just enough. A woman with a bundle of laundry steps around the flow, her feet sure on the damp stones. She does not look down. Her body knows where the gutter runs without her eyes. You wonder if she times her trips to avoid the worst of the morning emptying, or if she simply trusts her luck. She hums faintly, the tune unbroken as she disappears around a bend. The boy finishes his section, rests the broom against a wall, and sits on a low step. He pulls the cloth from his face and lets it hang around his neck. His hair is damp at the temples. He leans forward, elbows on knees, and watches the water's slow journey as if it might tell him something new. After a moment, he stands, takes up the broom again, and moves further down the street. A cartload of firewood turns into a side lane, and the scent of split oak joins the air, pushing gently against the sharper smells. You stand, let your breath settle, and follow the gutter's path a little further, your feet in the dry margin beside it. The smell is no longer shocking. It has blended into the town's morning, folded into the layers you have been gathering since the day began. By the time you turn away, the water has reached the next slope, heading toward the wider drain near the market. The boy's broom marks its passage, the scrape and push echoing faintly against the stone walls. You leave the sound behind, but carry its steady rhythm with you, the way one carries a tune after the singer has gone. You turn into a lane that narrows sharply, its walls pressing closer until you can brush each with an open palm. The air here is dense, and the source announces itself before you reach the corner, the tannery. You feel it in your throat first, a bitter edge that clings low and close, and then, in your nose, a mix of wet hide, smoke, and something sharper that settles at the back of your tongue. The street bends and the tannery yard comes into view, a patch of open space hemmed in by sheds and racks. Hides hang from wooden frames, their pale, hairless surfaces stretch taut. Some ripple slightly in the breeze, but the breeze is not enough to clear the smell. It is not a single scent, but many stacked together. The rawness of fresh skin, the sharp tang of lime used to loosen hair, the oily weight of animal fat, and the faint, sweet, sour whisper of urine once used in the curing vats. This is the plain historical truth. Tanners across much of Europe use these strong solutions to prepare hides, and the smell carried beyond their yards into neighboring streets. A man in a heavy leather apron stands by a long beam, scraping the flesh side of a hide with a curved knife. The motion is steady, short strokes drawing pale shavings down into a trough. His apron is mottled from years of such work, and the sleeves of his shirt are rolled high. Every few minutes he dips the blade into a bucket of water the color of weak tea, shakes it once, and continues. You watch the way the shavings curl and fall, light as wood shavings but carrying a heavier scent. At the far end of the yard, two younger men work near the vats. The vats themselves are sunk into the ground, their rims level with the dirt yard. Wooden covers lean against a fence, removed so the men can stir the contents with long poles. The liquid inside is thick, its surface dark and sluggish. A faint steam rises from one vat, and with it a wave of scent that makes your eyes water. The men do not flinch. They keep their rhythm, stirring slowly, swapping poles when their arms tire. A fringe belief persists here that tanners, by breathing these strong odors daily, are somehow protected from the fevers that trouble other townsfolk. It has no firm proof, and more than one physician scoffs at the notion. Yet, it is repeated often enough to make you noted. Perhaps it is only that tanners tend to live and work in the same quarters, apart from others, their own isolation doing what the air cannot. Historians still argue whether the clustering of such trades was purely a matter of smell and runoff, or whether it also created a kind of health buffer that was noticed, if not understood, at the time. A cart waits at the gate, its bed lined with rough boards. A boy loads bundles of scrap hide and hair into it, the hair drifting in the air before falling. It catches on the yard's damp ground, darkening as it settles. Flies gather where fresh hides have been stacked, their movement constant but unhurried, as if they too know the day's pace. Along one wall, hides, already scraped and washed, hang in a row, their surfaces pale gold in the filtered light. These will be dressed with oil later, softened until they lose their stiffness. The smell here is different, still heavy, but edged with something richer, almost sweet. You stand for a moment in that spot, feeling the difference a single step can make in this yard. A man walks past carrying a bucket, and you catch another layer wood smoke from the shed where scraps are burned to keep the vats warm. The smoke has its own character here, tasting faintly of the fat it consumes. He empties the bucket into a pit lined with stones, the liquid hissing as it meets something unseen below. You notice how the ground underfoot is uneven, the dirt tamped hard in some places and soft in others. In the softer patches, water gathers, tinged with colors from the tannins and dyes used for certain hides. One puddle is a deep brown, another a faint red, as if the yard keeps a pallet at its feet. From beyond the fence, you hear the faint murmur of another street voices, a cartwheel, the sharper call of a vendor. It feels distant, separated not by space but by smell. Here, the tannery owns the air. The workers seem immune to it, their faces calm, their hands sure. You wonder if they smell it less, or if they have simply folded it into their idea of what morning is. The older tanner pauses in his scraping to stretch his back. He leans on the beam, wipes his brow with the back of his arm, and glances toward the gate. His eyes meet yours for a moment, but he says nothing. Instead, he reaches for another hide, drapes it over the beam, and begins again. The motion is as steady as the boy with the broom in the gutter earlier, another rhythm that keeps the town turning in its quiet way. You take a last breath of the yard's layered air, slow and measured. The smell will cling to your clothes, perhaps even to your skin. Some scents are not washed away with a single rinsing. You step back toward the street, passing under the gate's shadow. Outside, the air feels cooler, thinner, but the tannery follows you for several steps, unwilling to let go all at once. By the time you reach the bend, another scent has begun to rise to meet you, wood smoke, drier and cleaner, from a row of chimneys ahead. The day is gathering its next layer. You turn along a row of dwellings where thin plumes lift from every roof, as if the town itself has begun to breathe. The smoke is light at first, a blue thread that unspools into the pale sky, then thickens where a hearth has been fed generously. The smell gathers you in dry wood catching, damp sticks protesting, last night's embers waking to orange with a whisper. You slow your steps and let the plumes tell you their separate, small stories. One is sharper with resin, one sweeter with fruitwood, one edged with a faint sour of spent ash. At a low doorway, a woman stoops and opens the shutters wide to chase the smoke upward. You stand a respectful distance, watching how the air inside moves out, then in, then out again, as if it too is learning the day's rhythm. Her hearth sits deep under a hood of stone, soot darkening the curve above it like a crescent moon turned on its head. She lays 2 thin sticks across a thicker one, then another 2 the other way, a small lattice for the flame to climb. The fire answers at once, crackling modestly. Heat begins to spread without boasting. Every house along this lane does nearly the same thing at nearly the same hour. That is the simple fact that sits in many town accounts. Life is tied to the hearth, and smoke marks its pulse. Food cooks, water warms for washing, damp hangs are dried, and the room itself learns gentleness from steady heat. Where chimneys exist, and more appear with each generation, they pull the worst of the smoke away. Though not all of it, your eyes prickle a little even here, in the open air, when a gust brings a hearth's breath to meet you. Inside, the prickle would be the room's first greeting, before bread, before conversation, before the soft clatter of bowls. A boy steps out carrying a basket of kindling. He empties it into a clay jar by the door and returns with a handful of dry cones saved from the last walk beyond the walls. He tosses 2 onto the coals, and a new pleasant note rises, resin bright and clean, like a bell rung in the nose. His mother smiles at the quickening flame. A fringe habit lives in these streets, tossing a pinch of salt into the fire to sweeten the hearth, a gesture half blessing, half experiment in smell. Whether the salt truly tames smoke or merely makes it hiss and leap for the pleasure of it hardly matters. The pinch lands, the hiss answers, and the room approves. You look upward, following each column as it finds the sky. Where the houses are older, the smoke slips through a louver or a clay pot turned to serve as a vent. Where the roofs are newer, a proper chimney stacks above the ridge, its mouth black-rimmed from years of work. Historians still argue whether the change from open vents to full chimneys arrived broadly in towns like this by the late 15th century, or whether it crept in unevenly for another 100 years faster in wealthier quarters, slower where coin and carpenters were scarce. The record keeps shapes, drawings, contracts, the odd fine for faulty flues, but it does not keep the exact pace of adoption. You accept the uncertainty the way you accept the smoke, present, shaping breath, not completely knowable. Further along, a door stands ajar, and you glimpse a trivet at the edge of the coals, a small iron pot huddled upon it. Steam curls from the lip, carrying a quiet promise barley, perhaps, or a thin pottage of greens and onion. The scent slides out and mixes with the lane's drift of wood smoke, making a gentle, savory ribbon that winds between the harder notes of resin and ash. In another doorway, a woman holds a twist of straw to the embers to light a spill for the neighbor whose fire went out at dawn. She walks carefully, the small flame cocked like a bird's head, and the 2 women exchange a look that says more than thanks kinship, perhaps, or simply the knowledge that warmth shared does not divide. Above one hearth, a set of hooks dangles from a bar, and on the hooks hang bunches of herbs that have gone from green to shadow green sage, rosemary, a shriveled bay. Their oils release slowly when the heat lifts them. You smell them in the smoke like memory, a softness that rounds the edges. In some houses, thin strips of fish or meat are hung higher yet, where the smoke turns from hot to patient, and the days themselves are the seasoning. This is not a feast. It is a hedge against leaner weeks, and the smell is a ledger more honest than ink. You approach a small workshop with a wide mouth, a hearth not for soup but for craft. The room is lined with candles cooling on rods, their pale bodies leaning slightly like a row of watchers. The air here changes coat. Tallow speaks, a fatty, waxy breath that clings to the back of the nose. The chandler lifts a fresh dipped pear, lets the drips find their way back to the pot, and hangs the pear among its fellows. He nods at you, and you nod back. A curious belief peers at you from behind the smell that beeswax candles carry a purer, finer air, and that their flame makes rooms kinder to the lungs. Perhaps it is only that beeswax carries less of the meat house in its making. Perhaps it is also a matter of cost and pride. The town uses both, and the nose knows the difference. Not all smoke along these lanes is wood alone. From a few roofs comes a flatter, heavier tone, the breath of sea coal or pit coal, depending on the land. Its scent is more stubborn, a little bitter, a little oily, and it lingers on cloth like a memory that refuses the door. It burns hot and long, and those who can reach it or afford it will use it for certain tasks. Yet the town has not decided as one body. Historians still argue whether coal had truly become a common domestic fuel here by this century's end, or whether wood still held most hearths, except in places where coal lay close and cheap. You breathe and find you can hold either truth, the resin, bright breath of stick and log, and the darker, weightier exhale of stone-made fire. A gust comes, and for a few heartbeats the plumes lean the same way, as if the houses have all agreed to point. You listen to the sound smoke makes when it is pulled, just so no real sound, only a hush that the ear translates. Ash stirs in doorways. A woman steps out to shake the soot from a small mat, then pauses to tap the iron grate with a spoon, loosening what clings. The mat releases a faint cloud that smells like yesterday's stew and last week's kindling. She smiles at you as if to say that every house is a chimney. Even when the chimney sits above, you stop at the lane's end and take a longer, slower breath. The smoke here is not an enemy. It is a sign that rooms are turning warm, that kettles are thinking of boiling, that bread slices will meet their brown edges, that hands will thaw and work will begin without complaint. Your clothes borrow a little of it and will return it later when you undress, and your bedclothes will accept it, and the morning after that will begin again with the same exchange. The town is stitched together by smells that do not need a crier. Behind you, a child laughs at the sudden spark that jumps when a twig breaks just so, and the small sound is as right as the crackle. You go on, slow and even, past the last roof of this row. The smoke thins behind you, but you carry its order with you, the knowledge that heat proceeds, and with it the day, and with it a calm that comes from the simple truth that many fires can breathe at once without quarrel. You reach the market square before the sun has climbed the roofs, and the air there greets you with a clean, sharp edge that cuts through the softer wood smoke behind you. Fish arrive before voices rise. That is the square's morning law. Barrels stand open in neat rows, as if small, round mouths have been set to breathe. The brine on their rims shines faintly in the dim light, and the boards beneath them darken where salt has run and dried and run again. A fishmonger prizes up a lid with a short iron, lifts it slowly, and the day's first full wave of scent rolls toward you, sea and salt, and the ghost of boats that never come this far inland except by memory. Herring crowd the top of the open barrel, each turned the same way, their silvery skins dulled by the bath, but still holding a whisper of shine. The fishmonger reaches in, not hurried, fingers practiced, and lays the first few across a wooden board. He works without speech, only a soft clearing of the throat now and then, his knife moving in sure lines. Another barrel, 2 stalls down, holds larger fish, split and laid flat, skin like pale parchment edged with a darker rim. Yet another contains only small, tight rolls in cloth, perhaps pickled pieces, waiting for someone who knows this stall's ways. Salted fish, especially herring, feeds towns like this with the steadiness of a clock. That is the plain fact repeated by clerks and travelers alike. Barrels move along rivers and roads the way sackcloth and iron do, and they arrive in time for fasting days and ordinary days alike. Where sea wind cannot reach, salt carries the sea's work inland. You feel the truth of it here, as surely as you smell it. The square in early morning is a place where distance becomes simple. Boats far away, barrels near, suppers assured. A woman in a stout apron comes to the fishmonger with a small purse. They trade nods, still no words. He chooses for her. Not because she cannot choose, but because his hands know which fish at the top hides the better piece beneath. The knife flashes once, then again, and he slips a pair of herring into a clean cloth she has brought. She ties the cloth with a double knot, not too tight. The smell of brine rises from the bundle like a soft bell. She sets a coin on the board, and he wipes the coin on the edge of his sleeve, a habit as old as his trade. At the next stall, a boy stands on a small box to gain height over the barrel. His job is to pour fresh brine along the top so that the fish do not dry where they meet the air. He tips a ladle, and the liquid glides across the silver backs, pooling, then sinking. The square holds a fringe custom that the boy takes seriously. Before the first ladle of the day, he touches the barrel's rim and then his brow, as if to ask the fish to lie quiet and sell easy. No one tells him to do this, and no one laughs. It belongs to morning as much as the brine does. A pair of cats patrols the edge of the square, thin tails held low with intention. Their paws make no sound on the damp boards. They do not beg. They are officials of another kind, watching for what falls and what should not fall. When a scale flutters down, it glitters for a moment, like a coin in early light. You think of the small belief that a fish scale slipped into a purse on market day will keep coins from running out before week's end. Whether it works or not is not your business. The scale is light either way, and the purse is no heavier for it. The fishmonger beside you cracks coarse salt from a sack, refilling a shallow tub where cleaned pieces may rest for a short while before they are wrapped. The salt smells clean, almost dry, yet the square around it is wet barrel sweat, splashes, a little blood from a larger fish carried in by two men on a pole. Their steps are slow and even. They lay the fish on a table where the boards are already stained. The stains tell a story that needs repeating every morning, and the nose knows the plot. Brine, fish, iron, wood. You listen to the small sounds that you now recognize as the market's calm, the faint clatter of a lid set down, the figure-8 scrape of a knife across a whetstone, the soft slap of fish on a board, the quick breath someone takes when brine touches a cut in a finger. From somewhere at the square's edge comes a newer note, fresh dill perhaps, or anise herbs and seed meant to travel home with the fish, to soften its assertive voice once the heat touches it. The mingling is gentle, brine lifting, herbs settling, the air carrying the mixture out beyond the stalls and into the lanes. Travelers write about fishwives calling out to customers, but this square wakes differently quiet, with choices made by glance rather than cry. Historians still argue whether calling and bargaining belonged more to particular harbors and market towns than to inland squares like this, and whether the early hour kept voices low everywhere or only in certain places. The written accounts do not agree, and the drawings show both noise and hush. You stand in the hush, and you accept that other squares may ring like bells. A man in a cap lifts a long fish from a tub and threads it on a thin wooden spit to hang in the stall's cooler corner. Smoke will find it later in a nearby shed, not to cook it, but to lend a second memory to the salt's first, the memory of fire. You picture the slow curl of smoke winding around the fish's pale sides, laying down a thin, soft coat that will carry across days. A fringe practice in some households is to warm a piece of fish over embers with a sprig of juniper held nearby, not burning, only breathing. Whether the sprig changes the flavor or simply changes the room's smell is a question best answered at a quiet table, not in the square. You lean on a post and watch a merchant tally on a wax tablet. The stylus makes firm, small marks, barrel opened, portion sold, coin received, cloth returned. The care is not fussy, it is necessary. Salt and fish are dear enough to warrant such attention, and the numbers travel from tablet to memory to a clean sheet back at the stallholder's bench. Another fact, plain and often noted. Market weights and measures are checked by officers. and the balance stones are kept where eyes can find them. You see the stones now, two of them, resting in their tray like sleeping birds. A cart pulls in with more barrels, and for a moment the scent thickens as lids are lifted and the square inhales. The men work with short grunts but no rush. The barrels thump onto the boards and roll to their places with a hollow music. The cats pause, tails flicking, then resume their measure of the line. The boy with the ladle dips again, steady as a metronome the square does not name. You notice how the smell shifts as sunlight finally touches the edges of the market. Warmth wakes other notes: wood warmed by brine, cloth drying on a rope, the faint iron of the knife that has been in and out of salt since dawn. In a small cup at one stall sits vinegar dark as tea. A customer dips a fingertip and touches it to a cut piece, a gesture learned from a father or aunt, not from a book. She nods, pays, wraps, and leaves, the vinegar's sharpness rising on the air like a brief song. You stay long enough to see the first rush ebb. The barrels do not empty, but their surfaces lie lower, and the brine glints darker where it shows. The fishmongers wipe their boards with sprigs of straw, not to make them spotless, this is not a place for spotless, but to make them ready for the next wave of hands. The cats sit now, satisfied that the square has settled into its proper day. You step away from the stalls and breathe once more, a slow measure to set your pace. The smell follows you down the first length of lane, sharp, clean, insistent, then yields to other scents waiting their turn. You carry a salt trace on your sleeve where you leaned on the post. It will travel with you, a quiet ribbon, until another smell lays its hand across it and teaches your nose a new story. You return to a quieter lane where last night's rain has gathered into shallow mirrors between the stones. The puddles are not clear. They wear a soft gray veil, a dusting that moves when the wind passes. You stand and watch a small swirl form near a raised cobble, round upon round, like a fingertip drawing circles on a tabletop. The swirl is not water alone. It is ash fine, sifted from dozens of hearths and braziers and ovens, carried out in baskets at dusk, tipped into corners, lifted again by rain and foot and wheel, until it takes a second life upon the surface of the street. You crouch to see more closely. Near the edge of one puddle, a darker smudge drifts and then dissolves, leaving a faint tail as it goes. In another, a pale gray film stretches and breaks, the broken pieces coming together again as if reluctant to travel alone. The smell is gentle and strange, wet stone first, cool and even, then an older memory of smoke softened by water until it smells like yesterday's clothes left too near the hearth. You breathe through your nose and feel the air at once cleaner and fuller, as if the street is washing itself while reminding you what it has been. It is a simple truth of towns like this. Ash is everywhere. It begins as wood and ends as powder, and between those two shapes it warms rooms, boils kettles, firms bread crusts, heats irons for the laundress, and tempers the small forge where a hinge is mended. Ash, scattered, will mark fingers and tabletops, and ash, gathered, will find other uses mixed with water to make lye for soap, spread on icy steps for grip, sprinkled lightly over the contents of a bucket to keep smells from rising too quickly. A pot of ash sits by many hearths, as ordinary as a spoon. You know this, and the puddles know it too. They hold the town's leavings and teach them to move again before the sun dries the lesson away. A boy trots past with a wooden yoke across his shoulders, two small buckets swinging. He steps neatly around the largest puddle, not to keep his feet dry but to avoid muddying the water he means to collect. He stops at a doorway where a woman meets him with a nod. She adds a pinch from a small bag to one bucket, probably ash, saved from a cleaner fire, and sets it aside with satisfaction. A fringe practice, you recall, says that a little sifted ash in wash water helps lift grease from cloth, whether it is the ash itself or the lime that sometimes hides within it. The wash gossips don't mind. The sleeves come cleaner either way. The boy lifts the yoke again and moves on, leaving only the soft clack of bale against bucket to mark his passing. You run a fingertip along the edge of a stone where the ash has settled in a thin lip. It feels like dust on a windowsill, but colder, more stubborn. The grain is so fine you cannot see it once it dries on your skin, but you know it will leave a pale mark if you touch your sleeve without thinking. The puddles hold tiny things with patience: a flattened straw, a scale from the market fish, a bit of char no bigger than a seed. They do not hurry to swallow such pieces. They let them announce themselves, and then dim them, the way a story quiets when the teller grows tired. From a doorway, someone shakes a hearth mat, and a new cloud descends. It is not a heavy fall, only a ghost of gray that drifts and lands, widening the circles you have been watching. The smell answers the faintest hint of yesterday's stew, a half-remembered note of resin from a pine knot burned late, and the dry edge of charcoal that was not given enough air. You hear the soft cough of the mat's owner and the quick slap of the mat against the doorframe. Then the door is shut and the lane listens again. You think of the way streets are built to manage what falls upon them. Many are set with a slight crown, a gentle rise at the center that sends water outward toward the gutters. Yet, not every lane follows this neat rule. Here, the center is as low as the sides. The stones have settled, or the mason had other instructions, or the ground shifted over years of feet and wheels. Historians still argue whether street profiles in smaller towns stayed more varied into the late 15th century than the tidy drawings suggest. Whether the mason's plan or the earth's slow will decided where puddles would live longest. You look down at the water gathered here and find the argument reasonable. The lane has its own mind. A man with a handcart rumbles by, and his wheel cuts a line through the largest pool. Ash and water part before the spoke, then rush back together once it has passed, erasing the mark as quickly as it was made. The sound is a low hush, almost like a cloth drawn over a table. He pauses to shift his load sacks of something dry, perhaps flour, and for a moment a new smell threads into the lane, pale and cereal sweet, before the cart moves on and the ash resumes its soft discourse with the rain. You kneel and watch the very smallest motions. A bubble breaks the surface without fanfare. A tremor runs from one cobble's edge to another and then stops. The ash seems to choose where to cling and where to drift. You remember a quiet claim shared by an elderly stoker that ash from fruitwood makes a softer film on puddles than ash from oak, and that coal ash where coal is burned makes a tighter, darker skin that breaks in larger plates. Whether this is a careful nose speaking or a fondness for sorting the world into friendly piles, you cannot say. Your eye wants to believe it, but the puddle keeps its counsel. Two girls pass with their arms tucked inside their shawls, stepping where the stones rise like islands. One pauses, points with her toe at a little spiral of ash and water turning around a trapped leaf, and smiles the thin, private smile of someone who has just watched a thought turn visibly in front of her. They say nothing to you and move on. Their steps light, their shawls taking on the faint damp that the lane is offering to all. At the far end of the street, you hear the clear tap of a broom's handle against a door jamb. A sweep comes to guide the runoff toward the main gutter. He wears an old hat and the broad patience of a man who knows how quickly a clean edge can be undone. He walks toward you, and with each push of his broom the water sighs and obeys. A small ridge of ash gathers before the bristles and then yields, slipping into motion, heading where street and habit send it. You step aside so his ribbon of work can pass. He nods, and in his nod is a shared understanding. The lane gives, the lane gathers, the lane must be persuaded a little each morning. By now, the day is lifting, and the gray thin skin on the puddles begins to break under a new kind of pressure sun. Warmth touches the water, and the smell changes again. The whetstone note grows brighter, the smoke memory lighter, as if the surface is exhaling what it borrowed and keeping only a trace. Steam does not rise. This is not a day for that. But the air feels different against your face, less close, a touch more elastic. You straighten and let your eyes rest on the unhurried show the lane is providing. There is no disaster here, no great sweep of filth, only the small, constant conversation between what burns at night and what falls as rain. The ash makes the puddles visible. The puddles make the ash gentle. The town's smell, in this moment, is a chord without a lead voice. You breathe it in, slow and even, and feel that chord settle into you, as if it has been waiting since dawn. When you move on, you place your feet where stone rises clean. Your heel lifts a little spray that dapples the hem of your garment, no more than a few freckles of gray. The lane does not mind, neither do you. You carry the scent forward, wet stone, quiet smoke. The faintest sweetness of wood returned to powder, and it belongs to your morning now, as surely as the bakery's warmth or the tannery's insistence. The puddles shrink behind you, but the ash remains in the seams, patient as dust, ready for the next breath of weather to teach it another slow shape. You follow the lane until the color of the stones changes without warning, as if someone has washed them in a shallow glaze. A thin stream crosses the street from a low doorway, hardly more than a ribbon. It runs bright in places where sunlight touches it, greenish here, a warm yellow there, a surprising violet lingering in the eddies near a raised cobble. The air above it smells not of rot or heat, but of something sharper and unfamiliar, like wet bark, dying flowers, and a pinch of metal all tangled together. You step to the side and watch the ribbon go, the way you might watch a child draw with a bit of chalk and then crush the chalk underfoot. The dye house opens onto a small yard, fenced with rough boards. Within, vats stand like squat barrels, some lidded, some open to show dark liquid that reflects the rafters overhead. A worker lifts a paddle from one vat, and the blade returns to the surface with a slow, heavy sigh. A length of cloth hangs from a beam, dripping, the drops striking the vat like slow rain. The cloth is blue where it has already breathed, but near the knots it is still green with the plant's old life, waiting to change. You know this simple fact, as many do. Blue in towns like this often comes from woad, and woad's breath is not blue until the air itself completes the work. The dyer raises the cloth, air touches the wet folds, and the color deepens before your eyes as if the morning has been hoarded in it. On a bench, skeins of yarn lie like sleeping creatures. One is the yellow of dried straw, another the red of a ripe apple skin after a day in shade, another a brown that might have been bark or nut once, ground fine and coaxed to release its store. A second worker resets a lid on a nearby vat, and from beneath it escapes a soft, earthy exhale, warm water, leaf, bark, a hint of stale urine lingering near the door where someone set a covered pail. That pail is part of the ordinary arithmetic of color here. Urine, aged until sharp, helps certain dyes bite the fiber. That is the plainness others sometimes prefer to skip. The dyer does not skip it. He pours a measured amount when the day calls for it, and the runoff carries a ghost of the act down the lane. You listen for the sound dye makes when it leaves a vat, no voice, but a thickness, a minor weight moving across wood. The man with the paddle rests it and turns a crank to lift the beam by a notch. The cloth surrenders another hand's breadth of itself to the air, blue deepening as it rises. A boy at the door rinses smaller pieces in a tub, turning them with a stick so the water goes cloudy and then less cloudy. He tips the tub with a careful foot, and the first trickle you saw at the threshold gathers a stronger friend. The lane's shallow gutter catches the color and carries it. A fringe habit, spoken of with a shrug rather than a secret, says that wool dyed during a waning moon holds color better than wool dyed when the moon grows. The dyer will smile if you ask and point to other things, water temperature, the quality of mordant, patience in stirring, but he does not insult the moon. He merely works as if all allies are welcome. He sets a small bundle of madder roots on a shelf to dry further. Their smell like clean earth and iron. The smell travels and then settles, and your nose tells you that the dye house is not one smell but a sequence that repeats. Plant simmering, fiber wet, vat breathing, the little metal edge where mordant meets cloth. You lean closer to the open doorway and see the vat surface film tremble when the beam moves again. The blue here is not the sky. It is something quieter and more grounded, and it tastes of leaf and sweat when the steam touches your tongue. Historians still argue whether the typical dye house in towns like this kept separate rooms for boiling, for mordanting, and for rinsing by the late 15th century, or whether many workshops remained a single crowded space, divided only by habit and broom lines. Sketches show both. Contracts mention walls sometimes, and only vats at other times. The runoff in the lane, colored and thin, suggests a space that works by order, more than by architecture, an order that mends itself daily. The dyer lowers the beam and calls for the iron pot that holds the mordant alum, most likely, though you smell a faintly sour note that might be something else in the dyer's small book of mixtures. A loom keeps to many dyes as a friend, that introduces the fiber to color and convinces them to stay together through washing and time. The worker carries the pot with a cloth at his hands, and the warm mineral smell stands up in the yard as if to claim its place. The dyer nods, measures without scales, eyes wise from years of spooning and watching, and the vat receives the offering. Cloth, when squeezed, speaks softly. The man at the tub twists a length of yarn, and a slow thread of colored water falls to the ground beside his boot. He checks the twist with a thumb, satisfied when the yarn holds a gentle coil rather than a tight spring. He drapes the skein over a clean line strung near the fence. When wind passes through the yard, the yarns lift and then settle, giving off small plumes of scent matter's rooty warmth, weld's straw-sweet brightness, woad's cool, pondy whisper. You stand as if listening to low, overlapping instruments playing a piece without hurry. From the lane, a woman appears with a narrow basket and a coin wrapped in cloth. She shows the coin. The dyer nods and takes a length of linen she carries. They exchange no promise beyond the look of someone who understands time. Dye does not happen in a hurry that can be measured only by bells. It happens on the vat's terms. Soak, stir, lift, breathe, lower, wait, repeat. The woman accepts this without complaint. She fingers a skein of yellow hanging near the door, smiles slightly, and withdraws her hand. The yellow leaves the faintest ghost on her fingertip, not a stain so much as a suggestion of future brightness. Near the fence, a small pile of spent dye plants rests on a piece of cloth. They look like bundles of garden waste, but the smell insists on their better history, a sweetness used up, a bitterness given. A boy scoops them into a basket to carry to the compost heap behind the dye house. The path he takes is worn and dark. It has known this motion enough times to keep the shape of it. The heap itself smells of steam and cold soil and the promise of things that will feed other plants. The dyer is a gardener too, though he may not say it. You watch the colored ribbon at the door again. It keeps time differently now, stronger and narrower as rinsing ebbs. The stones that have taken color before show their old scars, pale green ghosts on their edges, a violet bloom in a shallow crack. If rain comes, the colors will pale and then vanish. If the sun continues, they will harden into faint stains that will confuse a traveler later, who will wonder at a lane that seems to have borrowed a painter's brush. That traveler will be wrong and right at once. A small uncertainty rises in your mind. One scholars visit often. How much of a dye house's scent bled into a neighborhood? How much was invited? How much was born in silence? Ordinances speak of runoff kept to one side, of pits dug behind fences, of certain hours favored for strong smells to pass. Yet the dye house you stand beside breathes as any living thing does, and breath obeys season more than ordinance. Historians still argue whether the clustering of dye houses by streams was due chiefly to water's convenience or to the quiet agreements of neighbors who preferred color to stay near its own voice. The arguments do not change the blue deepening on the beam. The dyer and his worker lower the cloth once more and leave it in the vat, then sit on a bench where the shade is mild. They drink from a small jug and say nothing. Even at rest, the dye house smells of work, but it is a calm work, like reading aloud in a low voice. You feel your own breath ease, matches the slow pulse of vat and cloth. You are not eager to move, the color keeps you. When you do go, you step across the ribbon as if stepping across a small stream on a summer path. The water grips your boot sole with a slight tack from the dissolved plant, then releases it. The lane beyond picks up the scent muted now, stitched into the morning's earlier threads of smoke, brine, and damp stone. Behind you, the dye house returns to its quiet repetition, and the town keeps its colored promise, even in places where the eye sees only gray. You hear them before you see them, a lazy cloud that hums with purpose, shifting as a single thought above a pair of wooden tubs. The butcher's stall is set just off the square, where the stones are stained with an old, iron-dark memory. The tubs stand against the wall in a pocket of shade, each no higher than a man's knee, each braced by hoops that have lost their shine. The smell here is not shy. It rises in warm waves, blood that is turned from bright to brown, fat that cools and then wakes again when the sun touches it. A sweet sour breath from entrails waiting for the next hand. You come close without flinching, and let the truth of it settle. The butcher has finished the first work of the morning. Hooks along a beam hold halves and quarters hung with steady patience. A boy wipes the counter with a twist of straw dipped in water and salt. The tubs beneath the counter hold what cannot hang: lights and livers, pluck and tripes, a scatter of offcuts that will not waste the day by waiting for delicacy. The larger tub holds bones and scraps for the renderer who comes later. The smaller tub holds offal meant to be gone before noon. This is the plain fact written in more places than one. Meat trades live by speed, and towns set rules to keep streets from becoming kitchens for flies. Butchers keep waste close, sell quickly, and pay fines when the tubs linger too long where noses do not choose them. A woman in a dark coif steps forward with a small coin already in her hand. The butcher selects a length of tripe and a piece of liver, rinses both in a bucket that tints the water rusty, and lays them in the woman's cloth. She sprinkles a pinch of salt from a horn she carries and ties the cloth shut with a neat twist. No complaint, no apology. These parts are not charity, they are supper. The faint metallic breath of the liver climbs as she turns away, and it mingles with a high, clean note. She has tucked a sprig of rue into the knot, a common, quiet habit said to tame both flies and smell. Whether rue offends the insects or merely comforts the hand that ties it, no ledger decides. The flies do their work as steadily as the butcher does his. They lift when his rag brushes the rim of a tub, settle again when the air stills. A fringe practice lives under the stall's shadow, a clove of garlic rubbed along the wooden post at dawn to keep the swarm thinner. The post near your elbow gleams with a smear and smells faintly of the gesture. It does not banish the hum, but perhaps it keeps voice from shouting. The butcher ignores the cloud unless a handful becomes bold near a cut meant for display. Then he flicks his wrist with the rag. Not angry, only exact. Two girls arrive with a handled pot for drippings. The butcher tips a ladle from a pan where fat has pooled under a rack. It slides into their pot with the slow manners of honey. They will carry it home to sink bread, to fry onions, to keep until the week grows long. You catch the pan smell warm, neutral, heavy, without being cruel. It softens the sharper scent from the tubs and makes a chord you recognize now: iron, fat, wood, and the sweetness that meat breathes when it is no longer living and not yet cooked. At the stall's back, a narrow door stands open to a small court where water runs from a spigot into a low trough. The butcher's boy turns a tripe inside out with the focus of a reader, then scrubs it with handfuls of salt and a little ash. The grit whispers against the membrane. The water carries off what the hand releases. It is ordinary and not delicate, and you feel your breath fall into step with the work. The boy drains the tripe over a peg, then lays it on a clean board where sun will warm but not cook. A cat watches from a beam, not asking, only measuring. In many towns, the meat trade is watched, with more eyes than some. Weights and edges are checked, offal hours are named, and beasts are sometimes ordered to be killed outside the walls if water and space allow. That much is firm across charters and complaints alike. Yet the stall you stand beside hums at the town's center, the shambles tucked into the bones of the streets themselves. Historians still argue whether such central stalls had already begun to move outward by this century's close in places like this, or whether market habit kept them pressed into the heart, refusing exile until another age. Records are patchwork, drawings are proud or ashamed in turn. You accept the argument and let the nose decide for now. The center still keeps its sharper notes. A man with a barrow approaches the tubs, and the butcher nods toward the larger one. The barrow is lined with a stiffened hide to keep it from drinking too much. The man tips the tub and guides bones and inedible scraps into the barrow with a flat board. The sound is gentle, dull rather than clatter, softened by sinew. The renderer will take this load to a yard you can smell if you stand near the river on still days. There, the scraps become tallow for candles and soap. The smell becomes a lesson in patience and distance. Trade makes its own maps in the air. A boy arrives with a handful of mint and lays it along the counter's edge. The leaves bruise under the butcher's palm as he straightens them, releasing a bright green exhortation that cannot win the day but can carry a pleasant ribbon through it. He smiles at the boy and flicks a copper toward his cap. The coin disappears with a flash. The mint stays to do its smaller work. A woman passing inhales and says nothing, but her shoulders ease a little. The stall quiets as the first rush subsides. Hooks hold less. The tubs, too, show their bottoms between bits that the next buyer will claim. A dog slips in low to test the margin of permission. The butcher lifts an eyebrow. The dog retreats, then returns to lie down 2 arm lengths away with its nose on its paws, content to borrow the smell without the bite. A man from the horse yard lingers and bargains for a length of sinew to mend a strap. He tests it between his hands, nods when it stretches, and then returns to itself and tucks it into his belt. The world leans toward use. You stand at the edge of the stall and look down into the smaller tub, where a sheen has formed on the surface, fat cooling in a thin skin, marbling the top like frost on a pond. The hum above it changes pitch when the skin shivers and breaks. The smell presses closer when it does, then steps back when the shiver stills. The butcher tips the tub and drains a hand's depth into a smaller bucket to keep the layer from turning too thick. The bucket will be hauled to the alley, where a collector pours it into a larger barrel that smells like a chronicle of mornings. Whether that barrel belongs officially to the town's appointed nightmen, or informally to the men who have claimed the route for years, is a detail the paper does not keep. The route keeps itself. A fringe saying, half warning and half pride, passes behind the stall where the boys tie on their aprons. Clean boards, clean conscience. The boards are not spotless, but they are tended, scraped, salted, rinsed, and left to dry, as well as a shaded lane allows. The smell that rises from them now is firm and workable rather than wild. You breathe it in, slow, and find it no longer stranger than smoke or brine. It is another voice in the town's choir, carrying a part you would miss if it were hushed. When you step away, the fly hum softens with distance. The street lifts a little freshness to your face, bread from the next corner, an herb bundle somewhere above a door, the thinner thread of ash that never quite leaves. Yet the stall follows you politely on your sleeve, quieter with each pace. You rub your thumb against your forefinger and feel a faint tackiness from the rim of a tub, a small proof that you were present. The town does not ask you to forget. It asks you to know what mornings ask of hands, and to walk on with that knowledge folded into your breath. You follow a faint, clean, sour breath down a side lane and find its source where steam lifts in easy ropes above a low wall. The wash place is not large, 2 great kettles set over brick hearths, a rinsing trough fed by a narrow spout, and a bench that shows the smooth shine of years of hands and wet cloth. The air here is both heavy and bright at once. Hot water, wood smoke thin but persistent, wet linen breathing its particular green note, and the sting of lye that makes your nose feel newly awake. A pair of laundresses move with a practiced, even rhythm, their sleeves knotted high, their hair covered, their voices low or absent. One stands with a paddle in hand, and the paddle's flat face rises and falls in a slow, steady cadence. Each lift carries a folded sheet just to the surface. Each descent presses it back into the simmering water. Bubbles find the edges and slip away, carrying a shy breath of soap with them. The other woman leans over the rinsing trough, turning a shirt inside out, then right again, her fingers remembering seams more surely than her eyes. She rings without hurry, and the water that falls back is cloudy first, then less so, then almost clear. The smell of soap here is not flowers and summer, it is kitchen and ash and rendered fat, ordinary and needed. In many households and wash places, soap begins as potash, drawn from wood ash married to tallow, saved from cookpots and renderers. A plain, sturdy thing that lifts grease from cloth and leaves behind a memory of the fire that birthed it. That is a simple fact repeated, wherever recipes are kept in margins and ledgers. Ash to alkali, fat to body, heat to union. Some loads meet soap directly. Others first meet lye water, made by pouring hot water through a pot of ash and catching the liquor as it runs. The laundresses here work with both the softened feel of lye in one kettle, the milky calm of soap in the next, choosing by habit which garment needs which path. On the bench lies a small bundle of bluing wrapped in cloth, the color older than the morning and steadier than the steam. The women pinch a little of the powder into a bowl of water and stir. The water turns faintly sky, like a dipped rag, a squeeze, and then the cloth that had tended toward yellow finds its way back toward white, the blue tricking the eye, as it has for longer than the lane remembers. In places like this, the blue might come from ground smalt or a woad-based bag. the origins plain in one yard and guessed at in another. A fringe habit says that a blue rag hung by the door keeps envy off the household's linens. The rag hangs there now, though whether it is for envy or for ready hands, the steam does not tell. You step nearer the kettles and feel your face gather the wet heat. The paddle's thud changes to a softer tone when the sheet grows light from lifting. The laundress checks a corner, holds it between finger and thumb, and nods to herself. She speaks only to say, "Rinse," and the other woman answers with the same word, a little softer, as if passing the word itself into the water. The rinsing trough takes the sheet, and the steam changes character, a cleaner note, close to rain but warmer, rises as the hot cloth meets cooler flow. You notice a small jar near the hearth with a sprig of rosemary resting in oil. When the washing is nearly done, one woman dips 2 fingers and rubs them along the inside of a chest where fresh folded pieces will sit. The scent is modest, a breath that will not survive more than a day, but it makes a bridge between hot labor and the quieter afternoon when the chest is opened. In season, lavender might be tied in little cloth hearts and tucked between linens to keep moth and must away. Today, rosemary stands guard, and it shares its green, resinous whisper with anything that lingers nearby. A girl arrives with a scuttle of ash, and the laundress tests the lye by floating a fresh egg in a small cup. It hovers so that a coin's thickness shows above the surface strong enough, not too strong. This is a plain trick taught by mothers who learned from theirs, and it holds as well as any list of proportions. The girl smiles at the result, proud to witness the egg agree. Another fringe test that some swear by dropping a feather to see if the quill brightens is not used here. There is work to be done, not omens to collect. You listen for the softer layer beneath the paddling and wringing, the crease and slap of wet cloth on the board, the slow drip becoming quicker as a garment yields its burden, the hiss that happens when a stray splash finds the hot iron that waits on a trivet for the afternoon smoothing. The iron smells like metal, taught to remember warmth. It will, in a few hours, pass over seams with a damp cloth between, flattening the day's labor into the calm that households expect when a shirt is lifted from a peg. A man appears with a basket and a written slip folded small. He sets both on the bench and steps back from the steam. The laundress opens the slip, reads with care, and ties it to the basket with a length of string. Names, counts, a note about a torn cuff. Her mouth shapes the list, though no full words escape. Towns keep washhouses because water and fire gather neatly here, and because order, once learned, is easier to keep near a trough than across 100 separate hearths. That is another simple fact, though historians still argue how widely such public or semi-public places served ordinary streets by this century's end, and how much washing still happened in private courtyards or at riversides beyond the walls. Records name wash fees and rules. Drawings show both shared sheds and women knee-deep at a bank. The steam, however, says nothing. It rises wherever water boils. The laundress at the trough now beats a heavy woolen cloak with a beetle, a flat-faced club that makes a sound like low thunder in miniature. Each blow releases a broad smell, wet wool close to the lanolin it once knew, faint pasture, and the clean mineral of the trough's stone edge. You recognize how different it is from linen's green sweetness. The cloak will dry slow, and the lane will smell of sheep until evening. A fringe belief in some corners says that thumping cloth in odd numbers of strokes keeps quarrels from the house that wears it. If you counted here, you might be tempted to find a pattern, but the laundress does not count aloud. She counts by feel, by the give under the beetle, by the way the water runs clearer when the cloak has had enough. Near the door, a pail with a covered lid sits apart from the rest. It carries a sharper scent when the wind lifts the lid's edge. Stale urine saved from inns or households, bought by the pot when the work calls for it, used for setting color in certain cloths or for stubborn stains that soap will not persuade. Its use is neither secret nor boasted. The laundresses handle it as they handle everything, with calm and a cloth, at the moment it is needed, not a breath sooner. Your nose accepts the note without flinching. It belongs to the truth of clean in this time and place. Sun pulls a little at the steam now, and it unravels faster, drifting upward in thinner ropes. The laundresses roll the wrung cloth into tight coils, press them between boards, then unroll, and hang them on lines that cross the small yard like measured harp strings. As the water leaves, Another smell arrives, the pale scent of sun on wet cloth. A fragrance so quiet it feels like a virtue rather than a thing. You stand a moment longer to take that in, the way one stands just inside a church door to borrow a hush without staying for prayers. Before you go, one woman flicks her fingers toward the kettle, and then her brow a gesture that might be thanks to heat, to luck, or to the small saints that live and work well done. Historians still argue whether Monday was the wash day here as firmly as in other places, or whether the lanes set their own schedules by market and weather. The ledger of this wash place records coins, not days. Habit leaves fewer marks than payment. You accept the uncertainty with the same patience the women reserve for simmering. You step back into the lane carrying the wash place with you. Lies prickle at the back of the nose. Wet linen's green hush. Soap's kitchen honesty. Rosemary's quick brightness. Your sleeves feel slightly damper for having stood in steam. Your mind feels quieter for having watched work that has its own bell. Behind you, the paddles lift and fall. The town learns clean in hot breath and slow strokes, and the smell it gives back is not perfume but peace. You take a turning that narrows into a crooked passage, the kind that carries both footsteps and water toward the same end. Overhead, a row of windows leans out as if eavesdropping. From one of them, bundles hang upside down, long sprigs tied with cord, their leaves crisping and curling as they dry. You step closer, and the smell reaches you before you can name it. Sage's soft, dusty coolness, rosemary's resin, thin brightness, and a bitter green note that might be rue or wormwood. The air in the passage shifts from the damp neutrality of stone to a garden pressed into ropes and knots. On the low ledge beneath the bundles, a clay bowl holds a few more herbs, fresh and wilting in the same breath. A thin film of water gathers in the bowl's bottom. The stems still drink, though they have been cut. The smell rises like a reminder to the street that sharpness and sweetness can sit together without quarrel. Below, against the wall, a wide gutter runs shallow and slow. Bits of leaf and twig float toward the bend where the passage meets the next lane. You notice the smell change where the gutter's wet breath meets the herb's dry one, the sharper edge yielding to something warmer. It is not uncommon here for healers and herb wives to hang their goods above a drain. That is the plain fact. The air moves more briskly in such narrow ways, carrying the fragrance down to anyone passing, even if they do not look up. The runoff beneath may be less welcome, and perhaps this is part of the purpose the scents work, to mask the sharper smells that travel with street water. A fringe belief says that rosemary hung above a drain discourages rats from nesting nearby. Whether it works or simply gives neighbors the comfort of trying is left to the nose and the ears. A small door stands open under the window, and inside you glimpse a table strewn with more herbs in various states, some still green, some browned and brittle, some pounded into a dark powder resting in shallow dishes. A woman stands there, knife in hand, slicing thin strips from what looks like dried angelica root. The scent from that root is sweeter, more floral, and it reaches you in soft waves. Each time she presses the blade down, she glances at you but does not speak. Intent on the steady work of turning stalk to measure, she pauses to lift one bundle from the window hook and shakes it gently. A few dry leaves flutter down into the bowl, and the bundle goes back up, the cord looped over the peg with practiced ease. The leaves that fell join their fellows on the table. Nothing here is waste. Some will be steeped in vinegar to make a washing water for hands. Others will be tied into small cloth packets to scent a chest or hung in a sick room. The uses are many, the smells familiar. Even if you had never stood in this passage, you would know the work. From somewhere deeper in the passage comes the creak of a wheel, someone turning a hand mill. The low, even grind mixes with the occasional clink of glass against wood. You look toward the sound and see another table, this one holding stoppered bottles. Some are clear, showing pale liquids within. Others are amber, hiding their contents but letting the light catch the curve of the glass. You imagine the smells waiting in those bottles. Oils drawn from pressed leaves, tinctures steeped until their strength is ready, infusions meant to be dabbed or swallowed by the drop. The passage smells only the edges of these things, enough to make the air feel busy. The woman at the table turns to pour a little powdered herb into a cone of paper, twisting the top to keep it closed. She sets it beside a small pile of others, each marked with a charcoal scrawl. Historians still argue how much of a herbalist's trade in towns like this came from remedies versus charms, whether the same bundle might hang in a kitchen for seasoning and in a doorway for warding, without either use negating the other. The records hold recipes, some medical, some plainly magical, and often they sit side by side without the scribe finding a need to choose. The smell here does not choose either. It is all one breath. A boy arrives, carrying a basket of fresh-cut stems, the green still shining with the morning's damp. He sets it down and begins stripping the leaves into a wide bowl. His hands release a smell brighter and more impatient than the drying bundle's newly bruised mint, perhaps, or hyssop. A fringe custom says that crushing mint at the threshold invites good news. Crushing it in a bowl invites a better broth. The bowl will not answer, which is the case here, and you do not press it. The gutter below the bundles carries its steady thread of water past your feet. Now and then, a drop from the herbs above lands in it with a small sound and a burst of scent, an accident that feels like intention. You notice how the leaves and twigs caught in the water ride the current until they reach the bend, where a tangle of roots from some determined plant has found a home in the mortar. There the leaves settle, scenting the water until the next sweep comes. From the far end of the passage, a cart rattles by on the wider street. The air shifts, pulling the herb's breath out and down, mixing it with the cart's dust and the faint smell of whatever it carries, grain, perhaps, or cloth. The woman at the table leans to push the door further open, letting the air move more freely. She hums a little as she does so, the tune without urgency, like something one sings when the hands have found their pace. You step back to take in the whole of it, the crooked line of windows, the bundles in varied shades from green to brown, the slow gutter, the open door, the work that is at once practical and fragrant. The passage has become its own room, walled not by stone alone but by the layers of smell that gather and hold. You breathe once more, filling your lungs with a breath that is both kitchen and apothecary, market and meadow. When you leave, the herbs follow you for a few steps, then begin to fade under the weight of the next smell waiting in the lane ahead. But you know the passage will still be here tomorrow, breathing in green and breathing out sharp, doing the work of both masking and mending, without needing to decide which it does best. You follow a thread of warmth that rises above the lane and find its source behind a low doorway with shutters propped wide. The room beyond is half kitchen, half workshop. Steam climbs from an open copper kettle and slips into the morning like a tame cloud. The scent meets you in layers: wet grain, warmed air, a faint sweetness that clings to the tongue, and a low, bread-like note that makes the room feel closer than it is. You pause at the threshold and let the steam touch your face. It leaves a dew that smells of fields after rain and cellars that have kept their promise. Inside, the brewer moves on the measured path of a practiced morning. He stands at the mash tun first, a wooden vessel broad enough to hold a child's dreams of a bath. A paddle taller than a man leans nearby. He draws it through the mash with a slow, even pull. The surface answers with a sound like cloth stirred in water, soft, thick, willing. Malted grain lies at the heart of this room. Barley, most likely, sprouted to wake its sweetness, and then dried to keep it at the ready. That is the plain fact. Anyone here would tell you malt is the memory of a field made useful in a jug. When hot water meets it, the room remembers the field again, but sweeter now, and patient. The first runnings trickle from a spigot, bright and golden, into a waiting bucket. The brewer tastes a drop with the tip of a finger, not to look thoughtful, but because this is how mornings continue. He nods and lets the trickle build to a thread. Beside him, a small heap of toasted herbs sits on a cloth. If the day calls for hops, the cones are dried and papery, their scent sharp and green resinous, cutting through the malt's comfort like a clean knife. If the day calls for a gruet blend, the smell shifts yarrow and bog myrtle, perhaps a breath of rosemary or sweet gale, less uniform, more hedgerow than garden. Historians still argue how quickly hops came to rule every pot in towns like this by the century's end, how much the old mixes lingered in alleys and small yards, and how far price and habit drew the border between one kettle and another. Drawings and ledgers take sides. Noses remember both at once. You step nearer the copper. When the brewer lifts the lid, the steam shows a stronger edge. It rises, meets the cool air, and folds back into itself, carrying a suggestion of bitter flowers where hops have entered, or of meadow if they have not. The boil does not rage. It keeps a steadiness that suits the room. A fringe habit lives here, passed with a shrug rather than a sermon. The first breath of the day's steam is held close to the face to clear the head and make the mind sit up straight. The brewer does not make a ceremony of it. He simply breathes and goes on, and you think the steam would have woken you even if you had not asked it to. A cooper's mark shows on the nearest cask, a simple cut that identifies the maker the way a baker marks a loaf. The staves smell of oak and river and old soap. A rack of smaller casks waits near the wall, their bungs stopped with clean rags. A girl apprentice or daughter rinses one with hot water, pours, turns, pours again, listening to the hollow talk of wood and heat. She works without hurry, hands sure, eyes steady on the slosh inside. Spent grain piles in a low trough near the door, steaming like a small hill in winter sun. A boy forks it into a barrow. The barrow will go to a pig yard soon or to a cow behind a tavern wall. The room's economy goes out the door and returns by another path. A small kettle simmers on a side brick, nothing to do with beer. A cloth steeped with herbs hangs over its rim to dry, sharp with vinegar. The brewer dips it, wrings it, and wipes the lip of the mash tun and the spigot's mouth. He does this as a matter of habit, not of show. Clean is not spotless. It is the difference between what helps and what hinders. He ties the cloth to a peg to wait for the next pass. He lifts a bucket, and the wort moves from kettle to cooling trough, a long, shallow pan with slats that ask air to do its share. The surface opens to the room, and the room answers with a low mist. You watch a small skin try to form and then give up when a slow stir breaks it. A scoop of foam barm gathers at the edge, and the girl draws it off with a ladle into a glazed pot. You know this foam already from the bakery's early hour. It will go into dough if a neighbor calls for it, or back into the brew if the day keeps everything inside these walls. The plain truth is steady here. Bakers and brewers share a boundary as thin as a ladle's edge. On a shelf, a crock sleeps under linen. Yeast rests inside yesterday's gift to today, kept cool and quiet. The brewer lifts the cloth, peers and covers it again. He speaks to the girl without raising his voice. She answers by bringing a jug from a shaded corner, not cold, not hot, only living warm. Yeast asks to be treated as a guest, not chilled by impatience, not scalded by zeal. The brewer nods again. He favors nods over words, and when the wort settles to the right temper, the crock will tip its pale treasure into the dark and make tomorrow possible. Outside the doorway, two men pause with empty jugs and a short stack of coins. The brewer measures with a rod and a marked stick. He pours with the care of a man who knows foam counts for less than liquid, and that eyes judge faster than sticks. No calling, no boasting. The lane's throat keeps the voice low, and the steam does enough announcing for any door. One man brings a sliver of cheese from his pocket, breaks it in half, and leaves a portion on the window ledge without comment. The girl finds it later, smiles once, eats standing up with her hands washed. Trade is not only coin, it is also the habit of small returns. A cask thumps softly as the wood accepts the day's first fill. The bung resists and then yields, a sound like a sigh sent into oak. The brewer turns the cask with slow care so the seam can drink and tighten. He brings his ear close, listening for the whisper that tells him where the wood still wishes to be wet. He finds it, tips again, waits. Patience is a tool as plain as a paddle here. You notice how the room's smell changes as the boil eases and the cool takes its share. At first, the malt stands forward, warm and willing. Then a cleaner line grows, more bitter if hops are present, more leaf, sweet if not. Beneath both runs a cellar note, the quiet of wood, water, and stone getting along. Many in towns like this drink ale daily, not as celebration but as bread's cousin in a cup. That much is firm in accounts and households alike. Whether they do so because ale is safer than every cup of water at every hour is a story told more loudly than it lives. You have seen people drink from springs and wells, and you have watched them choose ale when work is long and heat is patient. The truth is not a quarrel. The truth is a table. Both vessels stand upon it, and hands choose by coin. by custom, by taste, by age. The brewer skims another curl of barm, and with the same motion, gestures toward the door where a woman waits with a small covered pot. She receives a ladleful, wraps the pot in her apron corner, and gives a thanks that is mostly a nod. A fringe saying rides with her as she goes that bread made with the day's very first barm sings sweeter at the crumb. You imagine the bakery smile at that, but you do not try to decide whether song can be measured with a knife. Light shifts on the copper, and the steam thins as if the room is exhaling after holding a note. The girl wipes the lip once more. The boy wheels the barrow away with the slow dignity of someone who has been given a valuable hill to shepherd. The brewer sets the paddle back in its corner, leans both hands on the mashed tun, and closes his eyes for the length of a long breath. Nothing dramatic happens. The room keeps warm. The wood keeps its secrets. The smell learns your sleeve and agrees to travel with you as far as the next corner. You step back into the lane, and the air turns cooler on your face. Behind you, the copper breathes less. In front of you, other smells wait with their own clocks. Still, the malt stays in your nose like a low, friendly note, and you carry it without effort. A town that mashes in the morning keeps its afternoons calmer. You walk as if your feet have been taught a slower beat by steam. You come upon the back of a tavern, where the lane widens just enough to hold a heap of straw, 2 low pens, and a trough made from a halved log. The smell meets you as a shape rather than a note-thick an animal, warm and sour-sweet, with an iron edge that clings to the back of the tongue. It is not the sharpness of the butcher, nor the clean hay of the horse yard. This is musk, married to mud, breath braided with kitchen leavings, morning made louder by squeals that rise and fall like waves. You rest your forearms on the fence rail and let the yard introduce itself at its own pace. A sow turns in the nearest pen with the slow gravity of a boat. Her flanks show the map of last night's straw pressed into the bristles. Piglets fling themselves against her side with the gusto of small drunks, then lose interest, then squeal again because squealing is what the hour asks of them. The trough still steams, where a boy has just poured a pail of slop ale dregs and spent grain from the brewer, peelings from the tavern kitchen, a heel of bread gone too tough for teeth, the rumor of onion, a thin sheen of fat that remembers a pan. The yard breathes that steam and makes it thicker. The smell rises, collapses, rises again. On the fence post near your hand, a strip of leather is nailed as a hinge for a warped gate. The leather smells faintly of smoke and tallow, but even those smells bow to the pen. The ground inside is a mosaic of churned earth, damp straw, and dark crescent prints. Where sunlight touches a wet patch, a film flashes once and goes dull again when a hoof breaks it. A cocked-eared boar in the far pen watches you with the bored suspicion of someone sentenced to a long, comfortable shift. He blows out a short breath that fogs the slats and leaves dots of moisture on your sleeve. You do not mind. A woman steps out from the tavern door with the second pail, and the air tilts toward warmth as she tips it. The slop hits the trough with a slap that sounds like satisfaction. The smell that immediately follows is a whole kitchen retold beer bread and onion skins, a lamp-like hint of tallow, a vinegary ghost from yesterday's pickle barrel, the ghost of cabbage made honest by heat. The pigs shoulder in, noses like blunt augers, and the trough's length becomes a philosophy lesson in elbows. The sound is frantic, then settles into a wet, busy peace. The woman shakes the last scrape into the wood, wipes the pail with 2 fingers against the rim, and taps those fingers together as if to thank the slop for arriving. It is a plain truth that towns like this keep pigs within their skins of wall and ditch as surely as they keep cats and goats. Meat that grows on scraps, fat that can be rendered, a belly that solves many problems by turning peelings into tomorrow's supper. Ordinances, too, have their say how many pigs a house may keep, whether they must be ringed to keep them from rooting pavements, when they may be driven through streets, and the fines for those who forget that pigs do not know law. The records are bored with repeating themselves about it, which is how you know pigs and people go on ignoring one another in alternating turns. The smell, here, suggests obedience and mischief in equal parts. A fringe habit clings to the railings, in the form of a narrow red ribbon tied to a pen's upper slat. Someone has made a small knot and left it there to turn ill luck away from the litter. Another custom, half practical, half charm, has given a copper coin a home in the corner of the trough under a wedge of wood. Copper keeps the feed sweet, the tavern keeper says to anyone who will ask, which few do. Whether metal changes slop or simply pleases the hand that tips it is not your business this morning. The piglets have made their decision and eat with the seriousness of monks at prime. From the tavern's open door drifts a companion smell, last night's ale dried into the floorboards. This morning's hearth persuading onions to admit they are onions. Wood smoke in a thin ribbon that cannot lift the yard's voice but can steady it. A man in a stained apron stands in the doorway with his arms folded and one ankle crossed before the other. He watches the pigs like a banker watching interest accrue. He nods once when the boar noses the empty end of the trough and decides not to pick a quarrel with the sow's tail. Across the pen, you notice iron rings in two snouts, a small detail that pulls the nose away from the ancient duty to root. Rings keep streets intact, so the ordinance says. They also keep the pen from becoming a crater. Historians still argue how strictly such rules bit across different quarters and decades, whether the walled lanes tolerated loose pigs longer than the charters can bear to admit, and whether scavenging swine roamed more freely on feast eves when tavern scraps were thick. The drawings show pigs like punctuation marks in margins of markets and lanes. The fines ledger tells a sterner tale. The truth, as your own nose suggests, sits somewhere between pens for keeping, gaps for wandering, and a citizenry that sighs and sweeps in familiar sequence. A boy arrives from the brewery's direction with a barrow piled high with spent grain. It steams like dark porridge, and the yard leans toward it even before the barrow reaches the rail. He tips a forkful into the far trough, then another. The boar forgets his thoughts about the sow's tail and chooses the easy road. Spent grain smells like bread that has taken a vow of silence, sweet, but humbler than the malted steam you carried from the brewhouse. The pigs approve of vows they can break with their teeth. The boy wipes his forehead with his sleeve and leaves a soft, warm shadow of yeast behind his ear. You hear a squeal sharpen into a protest and then flatten into contentment. The sow shifts, making room with a hip that deserves its own calendar of saints. One piglet, black marked like a spilled ink, loses its footing and slides a hand's width through mud with the gravity of theater, then remembers feet and recovers with an expression that pigs do not own but that you insist on seeing anyway. The smell surges when the mud is turned, peat-ish, pond-ish alive, then settles back into the yard's normal breath. A man steps to the far pen with a bucket of water and pours slowly along the trough's length, thinning the mash and calming the mood. The water carries a faint, well-stoned scent that stands out like a bell struck in a crowded hall. It rings once, then vanishes inside the slop. A quiet belief says that throwing the first dipper of water to the pen's far corner keeps pigs from fighting over the nearest end. Whether it works or simply buys the man enough time to finish pouring is a secret between him and the pen. He tips the last of the bucket and listens to the yard's volume fall a notch. Flies keep their parliament here too, but the yard manages them with ash. A small pot of sifted ash sits by the rail. A woman pinches a little along the pen's edge where wet meets wood. The ash dries and sweetens the border, persuading the flies to try their luck elsewhere. A fringe opinion insists that ash from fruitwood does a kinder job than ash from oak. The woman does not seem to care which tree the fire ate, only that the ash is fine and the pinch is generous enough to scold the damp. A neighbor leans over the fence to bargain for a piglet come Michaelmas. He and the tavern keeper speak with the comfortable grammar of people who have traded favors every year since a fence was a new idea. They come to the same number they always do, and the neighbor spits politely into his palm and touches the rail. The tavern keeper knocks his knuckles lightly against the same spot. The rail knows these terms and keeps them without writing. You think of how many bargains in towns like this are tied to smells. The brewer's steam, the horse's breath, the pig's yard. Ledger and ink chase after them, but the nose knows the bond first. The sun turns up a degree and finds the corner where straw is driest. The smell lifts there, losing a little of its pond, gaining a little of its barn. Some say, and you have heard it more than once, that a sow will grumble before the weather breaks, or that pigs go restless when rain decides to leave. Historians still argue whether such animal barometers were trusted in towns as more than old wives' amusements, or whether market days quietly arranged themselves beneath these creatures' moods without confessing it to the minutes. You watch the sow now. She does not grumble. The day will keep what it has. You step back from the rail and take a slow breath that does not apologize for itself. The pig yard is not a modest smell, but it is honest. It wears its usefulness without perfume. Scraps become meat. Grain becomes fat. A tavern's leavings become a neighbor's winter. The squeals soften to contented grunts, and the trough steam thins to a film that will dry and crack and be scrubbed away by evening. Your sleeve will remember this place for an hour at least. So will your shoes. The town will not mind. The town carries the yard as part of what makes dinner possible. When you turn to go, the boar lifts his head as if to weigh your departure. He decides you are not grain and lets you pass without advice. Behind you, a piglet discovers the ribbon on the rail and tries to chew a charm into sense. The knot holds. Luck, like leather, has had practice here. The smell follows you into the lane, large at first, then layered under smoke and dye and bread until it hums at a polite distance. Part of the choir rather than the solo. You turn into a short court that smells like warmth made solid. The doorway is open, and from it comes a breath that is neither kitchen nor smithy fat and wick, faintly sweet, faintly animal, a waxy hush that settles at the back of the throat. Inside, cords strung between posts hold rows of pale tapers, each pair looped over a thin rod. They hang like small, obedient icicles waiting for their next bath. A man with sleeves tied high takes 2 rods at once and walks toward a long trough. His steps even so, the tapers do not swing and touch. The trough holds melted tallow, clear near the top and clouded below. Heat wavers above it, and a skin forms if the surface is left to think too long. He does not let it think. He lowers the hanging pairs until their feet sip the bath, counts without speaking, and lifts them into the cooler air. They shine wet, then dull, then shine again as the room's breath moves past them. He walks the rods back to their hooks, sets them in their places, and picks up 2 more. The whole room has learned his pace. The kettles at the far hearth mutter in time. The cooling racks answer with soft clicks as cords settle under new weight, and your own lungs adopt the measure without being asked. Tallow tells a plain story here. Yesterday's butchers have sent their drippings and scraps to the renderers' kettles by the river. This morning, the clarified fat has arrived in great crocks, with lids that still smell faintly of boiled bone. The chandler warms and strains it again, a final coaxing toward cleanness. That is the firm fact. In most homes and shops in towns like this, light comes from tallow more often than from beeswax, and the nose knows the difference. Beeswax belongs to churches and wealth when coins are close. Tallow belongs to evenings that ask for enough light to thread a needle and no more. The candles here will serve the latter, the steady, honest kind that sputter only when neglected and smell a little of the yard when the door is shut. A woman stands at a bench, twisting wicks from tow and cotton, fingers running in a small dance to keep them even. She measures by span, loops by habit, and ties by memory. Now and then she draws a blade along a wick to shave off a stray hair. The cord must be close and modest if it is to feed itself properly. She sets the wicks aside in a shallow tray dusted with a pinch of fine wood ash so they do not cling to each other. A fringe trick, the chandler tells his apprentices, is to soak fresh wicks in brine and dry them before the first dipping. Some swear it makes a steadier flame and fewer tears of grease. Whether the salt does anything more than stiffen the cord is a question that splits workshops into smiling camps. The tray here smells faintly of the sea all the same. Near the hearth stands a second trough, smaller and darker. Beeswax warms there for special orders. Its scent is a chapel reduced to a breath honey and comb. Summer made into a promise. The chandler dips a test wick once, twice. The wax sets smooth, as if it were born to the task. He nods but returns to the tallow, where the town's real work waits. On a shelf he keeps a set of tin molds, short, upright tubes with narrow throats. Molds make quick work when orders run ahead of daylight, but today the dips will do. Molded candles are dearer in wick and time. You step closer to the racks and watch the tapers grow, thread becoming string, string becoming slender carrot, each dip laying on a new soft coat. The surface at first takes any print you offer. Your breath alone would wrinkle it. By the fourth or fifth pass, the skin holds itself, and a tiny seam appears, where fat cools against air, then returns to warmth and reconsiders. The chandler trims that seam now and then with a quick thumbnail scrape. He hums as he goes, not a tune but a level line, and the room's smell hums with him, low and persistent. Light in this town is rationed by habit more than by law. Families burn rush lights, thin rush cores, dipped in tallow, when coins are close, or when the hour is not worth a full candle. That is another plain truth, though historians still argue how often townsfolk preferred rushlights to dip tapers in the later 15th century, and whether the practice persisted more stubbornly in certain quarters or seasons. Account books list both, inventories stumble over the names, and drawings are careless about which stick is which. Your nose cannot tell a picture what it smells. It only judges the evening by how much smoke curls from the holder and how often a wick needs pinching. A boy tends a shallow pan where old stubs soften for remaking. He fishes out a clot with a slotted spoon and presses it with a paddle so the impurities settle. The pan smells sturdier than the trough yesterday's drafts in it. A touch of soot, the memory of a wick burned too long. The chandler lets nothing go that will make a new inch of light. He pours the clean tallow back into the main bath, and the boy wipes the spoon on a strip of linen that has turned translucent from service. On a peg hangs a candle knife, a small iron blade with a blunt hook. The woman with the wicks uses it to trim finished tapers to the same foot length and to pare away feet too fat to stand in a socket. A slate on the wall carries marks 4s and 5s grouped, a line for a tavern's order, a cross for a church's request next week. The slate smells like chalk and smoke. Even the numbers here have learned the room's breath. A customer steps into the doorway and pauses so his boots do not carry in too much of the lane. He sets a wooden sconce on the bench, its base charred a little from over-eager candles. The chandler runs a finger along the socket's lip and nods toward a jar. From it he lifts a thin slice of stale bread and fits it into the dish under where the candle will sit. Catches the tears. He says without flourish. The trick is as old as anyone's grandmother. A domestic convenience that keeps tallow from running onto books and tables. Quirky perhaps, but the room admits it works well enough to earn its place among tools. The customer buys a dozen and leaves with the smell already climbing the folds of his cloak. At the far hearth, a kettle mutters over a modest fire. The woman lifts it and fills a narrow pan. She touches a finger to the surface and shakes off the drop. Later, when the day stretches toward the pale end, she will pour a wash of warm water over the racks to soften drips and lift stray dust before packing the pears in a box lined with paper and straw. Even light must be clean when it is made of fat. You ask nothing. You only listen to the work sounds, the soft slosh of the dip, the click of rod on hook, the small wet sigh when a fresh pear meets the bath, the rasp of wick between fingers to coax it straight. A draft catches the room for a heartbeat. The tapers shiver, but do not touch. The chandler glances toward the door, and the boy mends the curtain with a practiced tug. The smell gathers itself again, and you realize you have grown used to it since stepping in. It no longer shouts of yard and rendering. It speaks of evening tables and letters read aloud, of needles found in twilight, of saints' days kept in smaller houses that cannot afford bees in their flames. The woman tests a finished candle by lighting it from a spill. The flame climbs, mushrooms a little, then settles when she trims the wick with a quick pinch and a spit-smoothened thumb. The top pools, clears, and throws a faint sheen on the knife blade. Smoke lifts in a thin, steady banner, no curl, no tear. She nods, snuffs the flame under a bell, and the bells inside keeps the smell for a breath longer before letting it go. Regulations live here, too, though they do not walk the floor. In some towns, chandlers are told to sell by weight or by count at set measures, to keep wicks centered, to avoid mixing too much old tallow into the new. In others, the rules are fewer, the trust greater, or the watchfulness lazier. Historians still argue how tightly guilds gripped such shops in small places like this at century's end, and how much of the trade stayed in household hands, wives dipping for their own tables and neighbors, while larger orders clustered under a signboard like the one above this door. The slate cannot answer. It only shows that light goes out as fast as it is made. Before you leave, the chandler lifts a rod fresh from its sixth dipping and holds it where the air moves. The pairs lengthen in your eye without truly changing an illusion born of shine turning to matte. He smiles at the trick and hangs them with their fellows. The room breathes on, warm and patient. You take one slow breath with it and feel a small calm arrive, as if you had already come to the evening and found your place by a steady flame. Outside, the lane's coolness folds around you. The smell of tallow follows for half a dozen steps, becomes gentler by the baker's corner, and yields to rosemary at the apothecary's shutter. Yet when you lift your hand to your cheek, you can still feel a trace of the shop's warmth, as if light were already waiting on your skin, prepared to be lit. You follow the slope where streets loosen into reed and mud, and the town's tight breath opens to the river. The air cools as if offering a polite correction. Behind you, smoke and kitchens. Before you, water that remembers hills you have never seen and fields you will never touch. The tide has fallen and left a broad collar of dark earth that shines as if oiled. Footprints stipulate bird, dog, boot, bare heel, each pressed into the soft gloss and filling with a thin mirror when you look closely. The smell settles low, wet clay first, then a quiet mineral sweetness, then the day's mixed town, breath softened and folded until all its voices murmur in one low tone. Where the bank bends, a thin rill from an open drain reaches the river's skin and becomes river, as all small waters do. Driftwood rests at the line where the last tide sighed and settled, each stick ringed by a fringe of silt as delicate as lace. A boy pokes at a tangle with a reed to see if anything more interesting than rope lives beneath. It does not. The reed briefly becomes a sword, then a fishing spear, then returns to being a reed. Each stir darkens the surface for a heartbeat, and a sharper iron note lifts when mud is tickled from its sleep. Closer to the water, the color deepens from brown to a blue-brown that tastes faintly of iron when wind moves in short, tidy breaths. A heron stands with the patience of stone, its feet set like small thoughts in the slick. When it steps, it wastes nothing, as if the air were honey and deer. You let your own pace learn from the birds slow, even weight placed, and waited for, then lifted. The river approves such manners. It answers with a steadier smell, reed, sweet over clay. Plain records speak of riverbanks like this as a town's practical margin, landing and leaving, watering animals, floating timber, finding eels where the bottom goes gentle and dark. Steps cut into the bank show pegs set into their flanks. You can fit a thumb in one and feel the polish left by rope and water more diligent than any hand. Boats come and go at bell-marked hours, bringing salt, iron bars, barrels tight as drumheads, sacks lettered by someone's careful chalk. That is the firm truth of many towns. The river is a road that does not need mending. At the scoured foot of the steps lies a small scatter the river has decided to return. A bead the color of smoke, a broken pin that still remembers a sleeve, a shard of green glass, rounded by time until it looks more fruit than vessel. Children hunt such pieces without instruction. A fringe habit whispers that a bead found on a waning tide keeps mislaid tools from wandering if tied into a kerchief's corner. Whether the bead helps or simply makes the hand more mindful, the kerchief sits lighter for having a secret knotted into it. A man with a rake works within a little rectangle staked by poles and cord. He draws riverweed into a heap and leaves it to shine. The smell that rises is pond sweet with a sour second note. In a day, it will be garden, not river. People call this harvest by many names: river, hay, weed, watergrass, and each name carries a recipe. Lay it thin, turn it twice, cart it before the weather thinks of rain. He glances at the sky and nods to something you cannot see. The weed will not be patient beyond noon. You pause where a rowboat tilts on its ribs. Boys have made a fort of it and left tokens in the bilge. 2 smooth stones, a feather and a nail made precious by the right task. The boat smells of old pitch and wet wood that has learned the flavor of silt. Above you, a rope runs from ring to post, taut as a thought held in the teeth. A gull drops out of the light and leaves its opinion in a shout that smells, when the wind brings it, brief and fish sour, more punctuation than speech. Not all the tide's gifts are welcome. Between the driftwood and the first reeds lie scraps that once had kitchen rights. A rabbit skull light as a cup, a rib that could be pig or lamb, a string of eggshells like a story told in steps. In freshet seasons, larger leavings ride the brown shoulders of flood barrel staves, a broken basket, sometimes a stool with one stubborn leg. The town gathers what it can use and sighs at the rest. Historians still argue whether magistrates and guilds here kept formal watch over what could be cast upon the bank, and when collectors must scour it, or whether outside the busiest quays custom and neighborly complaint did most of the tidying while the paper slept. The river keeps its own counsel in either case. Two women kneel where the water is shallow and the mud polite. They rinse flax that has soaked upstream in pits for days, lifting and letting it fall, so the silt loosens and the fibers begin to think about becoming linen. The smell that rises is pondy and green, a little sharp in the throat. They do not hurry. Their talk is the tone of work that lasts until the shadow of the bridge shifts a hand's width. A rope loops the bundles to a stone. The knot sits like a quiet certainty. When they wring the sheaves, water spins off in fine ropes that smell faintly of grass after thunder. A fisherman mends more than he casts in a back current under the arch, his net needle going in and out with the small exact sounds of twine yielding and returning. Tar from an old pot gives his line a bitter breath that keeps wet from owning it too quickly. A fringe belief on this bank says a whisper blown into the gill of the first fish, 3 words, never the same, will bring a second before the noon bell. Whether the fish listen or the fisherman simply ties his hopes to habit, no ledger records. The river writes its receipts in bellies and evenings. Near the pier, boot heels have printed the mud in close patterns, porters at dawn, likely each step punched into skin and glazed by the first slice of sun. You set your own beside them and watch a clear film tremble across the hollow before it closes. The smell deepens here. The town's breath meets the river's ash and herb and kitchen fold into reed and silt, making a chord without a leader. It is not foul, not clean. It is full and honest and steady. You climb to a stand of reeds that clatter even when there is no wind. Their smell is hay imagined by water, sweet and a little damp behind the eyes. Midges dance in the sun shaft by the parapet, keeping a tidy cloud as if the town had decided to think visibly for a moment. You wave and they reform, polite and inevitable. A duck writes a letter S in the skin of the shallows. The letter unwrites itself by the time you blink. Farther along, an old woman crouches with a basket and a blunt stick, feeling for the little black shells she will boil with garlic at dusk. Her back is a question mark that expects no answer. She lifts a stone. The smell that rises from its bed is deep and metallic, as if the earth itself had exhaled from behind a locked door. She smiles, drops 3 shells into the basket, and lets the 4th return to its small house. Quiet bargains like this bind the town to the river more firmly than charters do. Above, 2 men lean on the bridge and speak without raising their voices. The river takes their words and combs them thin. A cart rattles across and shakes a rain of grit from the joints. The grit freckles the bank, darkens a breath, and vanishes. From the town side, a bell tests the air with 2 thoughtful notes. Even the bell seems to smell different here, bronze imagined as sound and cooled by water's patience. At your feet, a narrow scallop of gray foam gathers where small waves fail. It smells faintly of soap, the plain kind born of ash and fat, more suggestion than presence. Historians still argue whether such foam on ordinary days speaks chiefly of household rinsing, straying down gutters, or of dyers and washers borrowing the bank as an extra pair of hands when work is thick. Ordinances and sketches disagree. The foam fades rather than testify. You turn back toward the steps. Your shoes carry a heel's worth of bank that will dry to pale dust before you reach the market. You pause and scrape it away with a stick. The smell that rises is the river made small clay and weed, plank and iron, far fields ground to flour. You breathe it slow and feel your chest answer, as if the tide had a room behind your ribs. Behind you, water keeps its long errands. Before you, streets wait with short ones. The margin between the two proves wide enough for both kinds of day, and its smell sits easily on your sleeve as you climb from mud to stone. You step away from the river's soft breath and back into a lane that feels narrower after the openness of water. Here, the stones remember cartwheels more than tides. The air folds warmer around you, holding a trace of grain and smoke. Ahead, the street bends toward a low building with a roof like a sleeping animal's back. Beneath the overhang, a row of sacks leans against the wall, each tied with twisted cord. The smell finds you before you see the signboard. Malt, ground and whole, in the slow exhale of a brewer's store. The door stands ajar, and you pass into a room where light falls in long, thin beams from the high windows. Dust motes turn in them like patient dancers. To your left, a broad table holds heaps of pale barley, some still husked, some already split. The grain scent is mild, nut-sweet, and faintly green. Near it, a second heap shows the color of old honey, malted, the husks dry and a little sharp to the nose. A man with sleeves rolled high scoops grain into a woven basket and tips it into a shallow trough. The sound is rain made of seeds, each impact small and polite. The plain truth here is simple. Most towns in this century drink beer more often than they drink plain water, for thirst and for safety both. Water is brewed into beer to make it last, and to make it kinder to the stomach. This storehouse holds the beer's first breath, before yeast and cask, when it is still only grain dreaming of warmth. Barley is common, but oats and wheat appear too, depending on soil, season, and purse. The smell shifts between them. Barley round and warm, oats pale and dry, wheat bright and faintly sweet. Near the back wall, a shallow trough holds sprouting grain on a bed of damp cloth. The shoots are pale, their tips just turning green. They smell of wet bread dough with a touch of grass. A boy kneels to turn them with his hands, careful not to break the tender roots. Sprouting readies the grain's starch to turn into sugar, the brewer's food for yeast. Once the shoots are just so, the grain will be dried on a kiln floor until it rattles like little bones. A fringe habit here says the first handful of malt from a new kiln should be tossed into the hearth at home to keep the next year's bread from molding too soon. Whether the malt minds where it burns, or only the people mind enough to do it, the hearth never complains. At the far side of the room stands a hand mill, its stones worn to the shape of long use. Beside it, a woman feeds dried malt into the eye of the mill, turning the handle in slow, even arcs. The smell from the meal is fresh and warm, sharper now that the grain is broken and its sweetness woken. She works without hurry, her pace matching the stone's low groan. On the floor, a wide bin waits to catch the ground malt, lined with cloth so no dust escapes to waste. The dust that does rise smells faintly of sun-warmed field, though the nearest one is half a morning's walk. In the corner, sacks are stacked to the low rafters. Chalk marks on their sides note the type and weight, but some bear a simple mark, a ring with a line through it. Historians still argue over such merchants' marks, whether they always showed the owner's sign, the source, or simply a code for the contents. Few records bother to explain what every sign meant, and fewer still agree on them. The sacks here will wait their turn in the mash tun, where hot water will coax out the sugars before hops or sometimes herbs are added to flavor and keep. You notice a narrow door at the back that opens into a yard. There, shallow baskets of fresh malt rest in the sun, the smell faintly different for each one, sweet and high. Another richer, more like baked bread. A cat winds between the baskets, occasionally pressing its nose to the grain as if to test its worth. The brewer, a man with a calm face and a smudge of flour on his sleeve, leans against the doorway watching the street. He nods at you, then tips a few kernels into his palm and chews them slowly. Almost there, he says, not to you in particular. Against the yard's far wall sits the kiln house, low and square, its vented roof letting thin threads of steam drift upward. You step closer, and the smell deepens, wood smoke and green grain turning gold. The kiln floor inside is covered with a thin layer of malt. A rake leans against the wall. Heat from below moves through the slatted floor, and the malt rustles faintly when stirred. A fringe belief here claims that a brewer who whistles while turning malt will get more lively yeast later. The man raking does not whistle, but his movements are steady enough to suggest he trusts the work more than the song. The air in the yard carries both the freshness of the grain and the shadow of the kiln smoke. Every breath tastes faintly of bread yet to come. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart rattles past with empty casks, their wooden hoops clinking like muffled bells. They smell of last season's brew, sharp and a little sour, promising the next batch before the first grain is even boiled. You return inside, and the cool dimness greets you with the softer side of the scent. The brewer pours a scoop of malt into a cloth sack and ties it with a twist of straw rope. He sets it on the table with others' orders for households that brew their own small beer. His hands move without pause. Scoop, pour, tie, set aside. The rhythm is as steady as any chandler's dipping or baker's kneading. Town work often shares its pace with other trades, even when the smell and shape differ. Before you leave, you rest your hand briefly on one of the sacks. It is warm from the sun outside and gives a little under your palm, like holding a promise still wrapped in patience. The smell clings faintly to your sleeve as you step into the lane again, grain, sweet and low, ready to walk its long road from seed to bread, from bread to drink, from drink to story. You drift further into the quarter where the smell of grain fades and something sharper begins to rise, a mingling of wet wood, tannin, and the faint sour of skins left too long in the sun. Here the lanes are wider to welcome carts, and the walls lean back as if giving space to air that needs more room. Ahead, a yard opens behind low gates, its ground a patchwork of cobble and trampled straw. In the center, rows of barrels rest on their sides, chocked with wedges, their open bungholes breathing a cool, fruity must. This is the vintner's yard, and the plain fact is that even in beer towns, wine has its place at tables with longer purses, at feasts, in church, and in certain households whose trade connects to warmer vineyards far south. Barrels arrive here by river or cart, the hoops still smelling of the forests they grew in, the staves carrying the scent of whatever season they were last wet with. To your left, a man squats by a cask, dipping a cup on a rod through the bunghole and drawing out a cloudy, pale liquid. He tips it into a jug, swirls, and sips. The smell meets you before the taste meets him, young wine, still carrying a whisper of crushed stalks and the dust of the road it traveled. He spits onto the cobble without ceremony and nods to the cooper standing by. They speak of tightening hoops and resting another week before racking. In the far corner, a boy turns a heap of grape stems with a fork, letting the sun dry them for kindling. The air there is sharper green, dry, and faintly bitter. A fringe habit in some places keeps a bundle of these stems above the door to the press house, said to keep wasps away when next year's harvest arrives. Whether the stems truly hold such power, or the wasps simply choose their own season, the bundles still appear each year without fail. Near the wall, a cooper works on a fresh barrel. The scent of split oak is clean and high, like the breath of a cold morning in the forest. Iron hoops lie in a neat arc beside him, each ring holding the faint tang of the forge. He fits the staves together like a puzzle, tapping them home with a mallet. Each strike sends a little cloud of oak dust into the air, dry and sweet, a counterpoint to the deeper smells from the yard. Historians still argue whether most wine in towns like this was imported in casks and left in them until sold, or whether it was common practice to recask into local barrels. Records note both, and the truth may have been as varied as the vintners themselves. Along one side of the yard runs a covered shed, its beams hung with skins that have been rinsed and dried, bladders and goat hides that once carried smaller measures of wine, now ready to be patched or cut down. They smell faintly of the sea from the salt used in curing, and more faintly still of the wine they once held. A man with a sharp knife works at one, trimming away any stiff edge, humming as he goes. You step closer to the press house, a low building whose door stands open to the shadowed interior. The smell inside is thick, old oak, tart lees, the ghost of fermentations past. Against one wall stands a great screw press, its beam polished by many seasons of use. The floor under it is stained dark where juice has run, and in the cracks of the timbers a darker stain still lives, older than memory. Even in quiet months, the room hums with a kind of readiness, as if the grapes might arrive tomorrow. Outside again, the sun warms the smell of the yard into a layered whole wine, young and old. Oak fresh and worked, iron, straw, a drift of dust from the street. A cart rattles in through the gates with 3 casks bound by rope. The driver calls to the cooper, and they roll the barrels to a shaded space, each one thumping into place with a sound that is almost hollow but not empty. A small table near the gate holds an open ledger, its pages smudged by damp fingers. Columns of names and numbers march down, but in the margins, Someone has drawn small vines curling around the letters. Whether clerkly boredom or pride in trade, the drawings give the ink a livelier breath. The pages smell faintly of wine, where a careless splash has dried. By the wall, under the reach of the gate's shadow, a row of clay jugs sits cooling in a shallow trough of water. Their bellies wear a skin of condensation, and the smell of wet clay rises each time the breeze shifts. A boy ladles water from the trough over them now and then to keep them cool. One jug is uncorked, and when the wind is right, you catch the scent of spiced wine cinnamon, a twist of dried orange peel, and the base note of the red it was warmed from. Spiced wine is a comfort in winter, though the day today needs no heat beyond the sun. The cooper wipes his hands and takes up an adze to smooth a stave. The shavings fall in pale curls, each one carrying the smell of the tree's youth. They gather by his boots like a second, softer straw. You watch his steady rhythm lift, strike, and realize it is the same as the brewer's scoop and pour, the chandler's dip and hang. Different trades, one heartbeat. Before you leave, the vintner lifts a small cup to you. You sip. The wine is cool, still a little rough in the mouth, but it carries the shape of the grape it came from and the road it traveled to reach you. You swallow slowly, and the yard's whole scent seems to deepen for a moment. Fruit, wood, sun, iron, and time. You hand the cup back, nod, and step into the street, carrying the taste with you like a pocket-sized season. You turn into a triangle of street that behaves like a room, 3 walls of shop fronts, a sliver of sky, and a floor of stones polished by years of turning feet. In the shallowest corner sits the apothecary's door, painted a patient green and propped open with a smooth river stone. The air changes as you cross the threshold, like stepping from a lane into a field and then into a forest in the space of one breath. Crushed root speaks first, dry and brown sweet, then dried flowers arrive with a whisper of summer's attic. And beneath both lives, a sharp, unfamiliar edge that lifts the back of your nose as if it were being reminded of its duties. Inside, shelves line the walls in steady ranks. Jars huddle there in glass and earthenware, each with a paper collar tied by string, names brushed in ink: Rosé Rubre, Sal Armoniac, Pulvis Ipecacuana, Cinnamomi, Flos Chamomillai. Between them, smaller drawers carry handwritten signs: Dragi, Pastili, Emplestra. The balance on the counter is small and precise, its pans as thin as a thought, its weights stacked like miniature stones for a children's game. The room smells organized. It is not a single perfume, but a grammar. Sweet over bitter, earth under flower, spirit standing politely at the back until called. The apothecary himself moves with careful knees, as if silence were a substance that could spill. He pinches powder with a folded card, nudges a grain from one pan to the other, and waits for the beam to settle to level. A fact that even those outside these walls know. Towns like this lean on apothecaries for what physicians prescribe, and what households decide on their own: simple syrups for cough, dried leaves for sleeplessness, vinegar tinctures to sharpen a sluggish appetite, salves for chafed heels and kitchen burns. He keeps cordial waters in blown glass bottles. Rose, fennel, caraway, and a small army of pestles and mortars waits on a lower shelf, each with its own remembered music. He sets aside the balance and draws a mortar near. Into it falls a small handful of dried roots, angelica. By the smell, a little floral, a little clean, followed by a measure of candied peel cut to obedient squares. He adds a splash from a dark bottle you cannot name, and the room finds a new center: spirit, sweet and trained. He grinds slow, not to force the pieces smaller, but to persuade them to agree with one another. A fringe belief lives in such rooms that the first turn of the pestle must be clockwise if the mixture is to remember kindness. No statute compels it, no university insists, yet you notice his hand turning as the story says, and the scent eases toward roundness, as if it approves. On a side table rests a row of small cones wrapped in paper, each sealed with a drop of wax, and a quick mark of the apothecary's ring. Pulvis cordial, the tag says in tidy letters. These powders will melt into wine or warm water to raise a tired heart on a cold evening. Near them sit sugar lozenges pressed in wooden molds, chalky and neat, meant to carry bitter medicines into reluctant mouths. You lift one and set it down again without asking. Even sugar smells of discipline here. A window stands ajar above a trough where rainwater settles in a covered jar. Distilled waters rest in nearby flasks, aqua menthe, aqua funiculi cool even to their scent, as if they had brought a piece of night into daylight. A still squats in the back like a copper animal with two throats, one to breathe in herb steam, one to breathe out its gentler child. Historians still argue how much true distillation had found its way into ordinary town shops by the century's end versus being kept to wealthier houses and certain monasteries. Inventories list alembics everywhere and nowhere with equal stubbornness. You let the uncertainty stand and accept that this room knows how to separate breath from leaf when asked. The apothecary's boy appears with a pot of honey that smells of late summer hedges. He warms it by the brazier, then drizzles a thin line into a small pan where powdered licorice and violet are waiting to become pastilles for a sore throat. The honey rises in a ribbon of scent flower, wax, a memory of bees and tames the licorice's dark voice. He kneads the paste with small hands, rolls it into a snake, and cuts even coins that darken as they cool. You hear each coin kiss the board and see the sugar dust bloom around it, a tiny white fog. On a high shelf, sealed jars keep stranger things: dried seahorses, a strip of deer horn, a bundle of something that looks too much like a tiny hand to be comfortable until you realize it is only a root that grew opinionated. Quirky tidbits travel in these walls: powdered pearls for the nervous, beaver castoreum for the stubborn cough, the ash of a pigeon feather for nosebleeds. Whether these work by art or by story is not for your nose to decide. The apothecary sells little and lectures less. He offers, weighs, and writes a neat label. A woman enters with a folded paper from a physician Latin dotted with abbreviations, numbers like small fences. The apothecary reads and hums in his throat. He reaches for gentian, bitter as a lesson, a touch of cinnamon, warm as a clean room, and a spoon of syrup of violets, soft as a lullaby. He mixes them, pours into a small vial, and corks it with the twist of a practiced wrist. The cork smell rises for a heartbeat oaken river, and then it bends under Violet's quiet shoulder. He writes the dose in a hand that will be readable, even after the label has worn thin. In the corner, a book lies open on a stand. Its pages show tidy columns, simples, compounds, weights, preparations. Margins hold tiny notes: works better warm, watch for rash, ask midwife. A sprig of rosemary dries between two leaves, marking a recipe for a bathing water meant to calm fretful infants and fathers alike. The room honors both learning and habit, and neither seems offended. You watch a moment as he prepares theriac-like electuary, though thinner than the grand recipes promise grinding spices, easing honey into the bowl, and stirring until the mixture holds together like a patient argument. Historians still argue how faithfully small-town apothecaries followed the elaborate panaceas listed in famous antidotaries, or whether what they compounded was more modest, practical, and guided by purse and purpose. The spoon says modest today. The smell says comforting, not miraculous. A small, sharp note arrives from the back spirit of wine opened briefly to rinse a glass. It cuts through the sweet and the earth like a bell struck in a soft room. Then it is gone again, replaced by the low peppered warmth of ground cloves and the lemon shadow of citron peel. The boy brings a handful of lavender from a jar. When he opens it, Summer stands up straight and nods to the room. He drops 3 heads into a pot resting by the brazier. The steam that rises reteaches you how to breathe. At the door, a basket of dried oranges sits for purchase by anyone with a coin and a cold house. Their smell is faint but sunny. A little lantern for a chest when burned with a pinch of rosemary at dusk. A fringe habit pins a dried orange slice above a bed to draw out night air. Whether night air needs drawing or only naming, the slice looks cheerful against the wood, and perhaps that is medicine enough. The apothecary completes his patient's bottle and sets it on the counter. He melts a drop of wax, seals the cork, and presses his signet into it. He slides the bottle into a cloth sleeve and ties it with string. The room smells settle for a heartbeat in the quiet after his nod. You realize your own breath has slowed to the shop's pace. When you step back outside, the air of the lane feels thinner and less complicated. Yet, the apothecary follows you on your sleeve, Angelica's root sweetness. Violets, cool sugar, the dry, polite bite of clove, and that whisper of spirit that made the room sit up. The town has many voices, but the apothecary's is the one that says, with calm certainty, that leaves and stones and sugars can be taught to help. You carry that certainty with you, flavored and faint, as you turn the corner toward whatever smell the day chooses next. You hear them before you see them, a rolling, patient murmur like water in a clay jar. The lane narrows, then widens into a small court, where a tall, timbered house lifts an extra crown upon itself, a pigeon loft perched beneath the eaves, its wooden face punched with neat, round holes. Ledges jut below each opening like little stages, and on them the birds arrange their bodies into stillness that is not quite still. Feathers speak a dry language here, whisper against whisper, a faint rasp when a wing resets, the papery sound of tails fanning once, and then deciding against flight. The air is lightened by dust and warmed by life. It smells of dry straw, seed, sun on wood, and the sharp, unmistakable edge of droppings gone old at the corners. Beneath the loft, a narrow door stands open to a stair. A boy emerges with a shallow tray, its surface graveled with peas and grit. He tilts the tray, and the little stones roll with a polite hiss. Pigeons watch with one eye, then the other, weighing whether the hour belongs to appetite or to preening. The boy whistles a note with no melody, just a steady ribbon of sound, and birds fold the decision in their throats and step down to the tray's soft feet, certain beaks. A gray cock bows and steps, as if the grain requires ceremony. The smell lifts brighter where the seed lands and dulls again when feathers stir it into dust. Along the wall, a low bench holds a basket lined with straw. Inside, two squabs sit with their broad, earnest faces and damp-looking fluff, the smell of warm bird close and clean. Their mother returns to them with a small sound shaped like reassurance. Her breath carries a faint, sour sweetness, and you remember the ordinary miracle. Pigeons feed their young with milk made in a crop, a soft food that smells like warm bread that has forgotten flour. The court keeps its hush while the heads bob open, offer close until both squabs look satisfied and sleepy again. Dovecotes and house lofts belong to towns as surely as to fields and manors. That is the plain fact recorded in charters and sketched in margins. Birds are small coin, meat for a table, feathers for pillows, and no small thing the droppings, gathered and sold for gardens and for craft. A sack of well-cured pigeon manure smells both sharp and fertile at once, and dyers and tanners prize it for what the nose would rather not explain. Saltpeter men, too, have been known to knock at such doors when their niter beds want a stronger start. The court you stand in holds that truth without boasting. A wooden rake leans beside a stone-lined pit under the eaves, and its dry, acrid breath says the rake has been used this week. A fringe habit survives in these houses, that a strip of red cloth tied near the loft's door keeps hawks uneasy. Whether the color alarms the hunter or only comforts the hunted, no ledger proves. Yet the strip flutters here from a nail like a small banner of hope. On the roofline, thin iron spikes rise, where the owner does not want stray birds perching. The spikes smell faintly of rust and weather. A small bell hangs by the stair, not for prayer or alarm, but to shoo cats with a human hand sound rather than a foot's four. The bell's voice is light and bright. It lifts the dust and then lets it settle again. The boy finishes the tray and sets a clay dish of water beneath the lowest ledge. The first pigeon steps into it with an expression that is all business, if birds can be said to have expressions. Water lifts a different smell into the quartz stone, cool and brief, and for a moment the sharper notes hide their faces. The pigeon bows, cups water, tosses it back with the neat jerk of a neck trained to the act. A second joins, then a third. The dish becomes for a minute the town's smallest river. You watch the curve of beaks, the careful spacing, the way small quarrels end without anyone remembering to be offended. Inside the low door beside the stair, you glimpse shelves of clay nest bowls mortared to the wall. Each holds a neat ring of straw and one or two pale, mild-smelling eggs. The room is cool, and its ammonia edge makes the eye sting just enough to feel honest. A woman stands there with a broom whose bristles have been trimmed short to stiffen them. She sweeps once under each row, drawing dry drifts into a pile that looks lighter than it is. She hums, and the hum finds the dove murmur above and braids with it into something that could be called a tune, if tunes were made of patience. It is often said, and the town notaries repeat it with varying degrees of irritation, that lofts and free-flying pigeons are a privilege in some jurisdictions, bound to certain houses or persons because of the bird's fondness for other people's grain. Fines exist, scolds exist, and yet pigeons exist all the same. Historians still argue how tightly such rights were policed in towns of this size by the 15th century's end, and whether urban lofts multiplied faster than record keepers could sigh. Drawings show tidy holes in gables. Complaints show trampled seedlings. The truth likely perched between ink and appetite. On the bench, a small crock with a lid keeps grit mixed with crushed charcoal. The keeper says it sweetens birds from within. Whether it sweetens birds or only someone's sense of having done right by them, the crock smells faintly of hearth and chalk. Nearby, a shallow pan holds anise and fennel seeds, quirky as it sounds. Some swear that a pinch of anise blown over a young bird teaches it to love the loft smell and return without wandering. The woman smiles when asked. She has seen strays come home for less. She pinches a seed and drops it on the ledge as if to feed a story, if not a bird. On the highest rail, a pigeon fluffs, then lifts, then decides against the sky. Its wings make two soft claps that stir the court's perfume into new shapes: dry feather, warm powder, the crisp, no smart sting that says the rake will be taken up again by dusk. You look down and see the practical side of all this gentleness. The flagstones under the eaves are white-starred, and then swept clean to a corner, where a pile has dried to the right texture for a sack. The smell there is blunt and industrious. A ledger lies open on a stool. Small numbers, dates, a circle to mark a clutch, a cross to mark a bird taken for table. The ink smells faintly of iron and vinegar. The page smells of a hand washed in cold water and wiped on an apron. Town life keeps accounts even where it keeps birds, and the accounts climb in tidy stacks next to jars of grit and seed. A feather is pressed between two older pages, its shaft flattened like a reed that learned to be a line. You stand under the eaves and let the loft's breath settle on your sleeve. It is a light, dry smell that manages to be both clean and not sun-on dust. Grain made smaller by beaks. The tidy sharpness of a place that feeds itself order by the handful. Above you, the holes blink with small heads. A hen slips past, her body a purse for air, her wings sketching patterns on your cheek that you feel more than hear. When you step back into the lane, the murmur fades but does not disappear. A soft powder trails you, and a faint, acrid brightness sits at the top of your breath. You carry both without complaint. The town has asked you to accept many smells. This one repays with quiet meat, softer pillows, and gardens that remember the loft's patience when their leaves flush green in spring. You find a narrow run of workshops where the walls shine with a thin salt bloom, as if the stones themselves had learned to sweat. The air warns you apace before you arrive. A prickle at the back of the nose, a bright sting that feels clean and dangerous at once. A door stands open, and within it a pair of kettles sit like squat black bells over brick hearths. Steam lifts from them in white ropes, then loses its nerve and spreads along the ceiling. The smell here is twofold: sharp lye that asks your eyes to blink, and warm fat that tries to be gentle about its purpose. You pause, wait for your breath to match the room, and step inside. A woman with sleeves bound high stirs the larger kettle with a paddle that could be an oar. The surface is not quite water, not yet soap, but something between a milky liquor that clings to the paddle's edge in slow skirts. She lifts, counts a heartbeat, lowers. The paddle makes a soft clap as it returns. Beside her, a boy tips a small jar and adds a thin stream of liquid. The scent spikes for a moment. This is lye stronger than wash water, drawn from ash leached with hot rainwater and settled until it could be trusted. The plain fact is steady across households and towns. Soap here is marriage, work, alkali to fat, heat to patience, stirring to faith. The fat comes from tallow or kitchen drippings saved and clarified. Sometimes, when coin and connection permit, olive oil makes a paler, finer cake the Southerners boast of and locals call Castile. On a bench, clean tallow sits in pans, opaque and calm, carrying the modest breath of a cool kitchen. The woman cuts a slab into obedient squares and feeds them to the kettle's rim, where they soften and slide in on their own. Each piece leaves a dull sheen on the brick that will later receive its share of ash dust. A fringe practice survives here. A pinch of salt thrown into the boil to help the grain break when soap separates cleanly from spent lye. Whether salt truly persuades the mixture or only tells the hand when to watch more closely, the pinch lands with ceremony, and the woman's face turns slightly toward the kettle, as if listening for a new note. Near the door, shallow wooden trays wait to be filled, their bottoms lined with old linen that smells faintly of nothing, that is to say, of clean. You run a finger along one tray's edge and feel the fine crystals the room leaves on everything it keeps. The boy brings a small pot close animal scent, a little high, and pours a ribbon into the smaller kettle. Not all fats behave with equal manners. Some need more talking to. Some sulk until the heat is patient. Some split at a glance and settle. The workshop knows each one's temper the way bakers know wheat and rye by their silence. The glass test stands by the hearth. A fresh-laid egg, a coin, a feather. The woman smiles at them without scorn. She dips a ladle, fills a small cup, and slides the egg in. It lifts until a coin's thickness crowns above the surface, and she nods. That old rule, too much float and the lye will bite hands, too little and the soap will be shy, is not written in any statute, but the palms of the quarter know it as well as weights and measures. She pours the cup back, and the mixture accepts its child. Historians still argue how much of this work remained domestic and neighborly in towns like this by the century's end, and how much belonged to shops under a sign with prices and penalties. Guild records in some places name chandlers and soapers together and bully them with rules. In others, ledgers sleep while back rooms boil. The steam refuses to choose sides. A second woman tends a row of small molds shaped like bricks. She rubs each with a scrap of cloth dipped in oil so the finished cakes will turn out without complaint. The cloth releases a breath of poppy seed, dear and rare here, or perhaps simply the ghost of last year's walnut press. Into a bowl she pours herbs bruised to readiness. A little rosemary for households that like their hands to carry the hedge. A little marjoram for those who swear cooking goes better when soap smells faintly of supper. Quirky as these touches are, they are not forbidden. The town asks chiefly that soap clean and that drains run. Beside the hearth a lye barrel stands, its bung knocked free. Ash in its belly looks like a gray dune. Holes punched near the bottom take hot water that gives back an alkaline liquor the color of weak tea. The boy pours slowly from a pitcher, then waits, then draws the first drips in a dipper and sets them where cool meets nose. He tastes with the tip of a wetted straw on his lip, winces the correct amount, and nods. His mouth is the workshop's second balance. A small uncertainty lingers here for scholars. Were caustic lies made with lime and ash common in small-town shops at this date? Or did most rely on ash leachings alone, saving the hotter lime works for cloth finishers and dyers? Contracts show both. Recipes smear centuries together. Your eye trusts the barrel, and your nose trusts the wince. When the mixture reaches its moment, it changes with a modesty that feels like weather turning. The surface loses its scattered shine, grows satiny, and thickens at the edges where the paddle drags. The woman lifts it, lets a ribbon fall back through itself, and watches the line stand for a breath before it disappears. She points to the trays. The boy brings them close. Together they pour, not slowly, but steadily, so that the soap lays down in an even bed that will not show air pockets when cut. The smell shifts as it leaves heat. Less bite, more body. Less threat, more promise. On a high shelf, irregular cakes from last week cure in a draft that the alley provides without asking. When soap sits, the lye that still thinks too hard thinks less. The cake hardens and holds, and the slice grows cleaner in use. A simple fact hides in the patience. Softer soaps, high in potash, stay paste, like and live in pots where a knife or fingers lift what is needed. Harder ones, salt split and longer cured, stack like pale cheeses and travel better. Historians still argue how widely hard cakes as we would recognize them were in everyday use here and now, versus soft soap ladled by the scoop. Inventories and wills whisper both ways. The plates on the shelf do not testify. A girl comes in with a wicker of stale urine bought for a few coppers from a tavern. She sets it by the smaller kettle, wipes her hands on her apron, and lifts her chin at the gentle change in the room's mood. The sharper animal edge sneaks in and then tucks itself under the stronger lye scent. Not for this batch. You guess the woman shunts the jar aside, but later, for scouring cloth or whitening linen that will come from the wash place needing a sterner persuasion. The town shares its chemistry like bread, nothing is orphaned. Each strong smell finds a use. The first trays, now poured, receive a veil of ash sifted through fingers. The woman smooths it with a flat board. This keeps a skin from sweating, she says, and lends a drier face to a cake that might be wrapped. The board smells like every batch that has met it, sweet, mineral, faintly meaty, faintly green where herbs once were lavish. She draws a line with a string when the top cools enough to keep a mark. Tomorrow, the string will become a knife. Today, it is a promise laid lengthwise. A man from the bathhouse stops in the doorway and exchanges 2 quiet words. He leaves with a pail of weaker lye and a measure of soft soap in a pot, the lid tied down with a twist of reed. The bathhouse prefers paste they can ladle. It clings to tiles and hands without arguing. The paste breathes a calm, kitchen-clean scent as it passes, then vanishes into the lane. On a peg, a scrap of leather hangs with notches cut along one edge. The boy takes it down and runs it through the fresh soap to draw straight channels that will guide tomorrow's cutting. He presses a small mark into one corner of the tray with a bit of carved wood, a crossbar, and circle the shop sign so customers will know whose bars they hold when the market sets out its stacks. Town ordinances in some places demand such marks. In others, they only help pride find its way home. Either way, the soap will speak when someone asks. A basin near the door holds clean sand and a basket of soapwort tied in little bundles for those who will not or cannot spend for cakes. The plant foams when coaxed in warm water and leaves cloth kindly, if not bravely. The basin's smell is meadow-light compared to the kettle's command. The woman gestures to it when a neighbor arrives with a few buttons worth of coins, suggesting, without sting, the cheaper bath for fine sleeves. Habits live here side by side. No one scolds thrift. As the heat eases, the air settles into its final chord. Lye tamed enough to breathe through. Fat, remembering it was once part of a living thing and deciding to be useful again. Ash as a cool hand on the brow and a lettuce pale hint of rosemary from the bowl. The second woman is scraping clean. Your own skin feels lightly slicked by steam, and when you wipe your palm on your sleeve, the cloth smells different by a small, honest degree. You step back into the alley, and the sting softens to a memory under your tongue. The stones outside carry a scattered whitening, where spills have dried ghost footprints of buckets and trays. A drip from the eave taps a tray rack and finds the gutter. The drop smells faintly of salt and clean wood. Behind you, a paddle claps the kettle once more and then rests against brick. The shop exhales, and the alley accepts the breath as one more part of the town's grammar. You follow a quiet strip of houses to where the walls lean back and make room for a patch of green. It is not a lord's garden, nor even the careful knots you have seen behind a merchant's hall, but a working square of earth hemmed by wattle and low brick. The gate lifts with a wooden sigh, and the smell meets you like a hand held out a breath of damp leaves and turned soil. Onion tops bruised by fingers, cabbage stems giving up their last sweetness, and a warm, steam-soft note from a heap that smokes gently though no fire burns there. You stand and let the mixture declare itself. This is kitchen-made earth again. The heap sits in the far corner, where rain runs kindly along a slight slope. It is layered in a way that looks careless until your eyes learn its order. Straw that remembers the pig yard, peelings and stems that recall last night's pot, a scattering of eggshells freckling the brown, a thin cover of swept leaves gathered from the lane where they piled at the wall. When the wind slides across, a faint heat lifts from the middle, and with it a scent like a forest floor that has learned to speak of cabbages. The steam does not climb. It lingers at shoulder height and then curls away. A domestic weather. A woman in a dark kirtle works with a fork whose tines have remembered many autumns. She lifts the top layer and folds it back on itself, revealing the middle where the color runs deeper and the smell grows low and soft. Worms turn away from the light with untroubled urgency. She tips a small bucket and sprinkles the heap with water that smells of the rain barrels inside wood, moss, the shadow of last winter's ice. The sound is like a slow hand clapping. She does not hurry. The heap is not a pot. It answers by season, not by bell. It is a plain fact in towns like this that gardens lean on what kitchens and stables give. Dung horse, pig, and sometimes cow from a stall within the walls finds its place here in thin bands. Straw carries it. Leaves and sweepings soften it. When cost allows, a barrow from the horse yard or a sack from under a pigeon loft is bought and spread with care. The woman keeps such riches for the back beds where beans will set their roots. She lays a finer layer over the onion ridge, cautious with strong gifts, lest the bulbs grow boastful rather than useful. The fork moves in a quiet grammar you can read from the gate. Spare here, generous there, patience everywhere. At the heap's edge, a child kneels with a small knife and opens a melon's rind, saved from the tavern's board. The inside smells faintly wine-sweet even now. He cuts the flesh he finds for the chickens that will wander in later and sets the rind where the steam will make sense of it. He tucks a sprig of mint under a clod and presses the clod down with both palms. A fringe habit, learned from grandmothers who smile but do not insist, says that hiding a sweet leaf in the heap keeps flies modest and mice from thinking themselves invited. Whether it works or only buys a laugh at the fence, the mint will become part of the brown all the same. Beyond the heap, beds run in narrow strips, their edges held with wattled hurdles that smell faintly of willow. Wintergreens stand low but stubborn. A line of leeks holds a clean onion breath even in the cold. At the far wall, a quince tree keeps its crooked dignity. The wind shaking its branches raises a fragrance like apples with better manners. Between the beds, small piles wait, crushed shells saved for the hens or for scratching into the soil where cabbages will sit, soot from the hearth to draw slugs away, a crock of sand with a handful of ash for smoothing the edge of a hoe. The garden keeps its own cupboard in plain sight. You crouch by the heap and see the layers telling their slow story. Here, a shredded twist of flax thread that will vanish by spring. There, a damp crust of bread, softened to a dark paste and already undone at the corners. A fish head lies deeper in, its eye a dull marble. Some swear by burying such heads under hills for pumpkins or peas, claiming the vines remember the sea and repay the favor with large leaves. Quirky perhaps, but the heap is a place where such stories are tested without judgment. The head will not argue. It will turn into bean, song, or simply into soil, and either answer pleases the beds. A neighbor leans on the fence and passes a bundle of leaves tied with a straw ribbon. The leaves, onion and beet, and something bitter, have the clean, green sour scent of kitchen water wrung out. The woman takes them and tucks them under a thin veil of straw near the top. She keeps a small notebook in her mind rather than in ink. What went in, what the heat did, where the heap cooled, where it burned too briskly and needed damp. Historians still argue how much such household composting was spoken of in records, whether middens and heaps were written as nuisances or necessities, and how often towns formalized their places and sizes along back lanes. Ordinances in some quarters scold against open heaps. Drawings in others show them as ordinary as wells. The smell under your nose gives its own answer. The heap lives where it is most useful, and the garden respects it. A man arrives with a barrow of leaf mold from the ditch by the wall, the mold smelling like rain folded and kept for a year. He tips it, and the heap accepts the gift with a dark sigh. He wipes his hands on his jerkin and points with his chin to the furthest bed, where a row of small pegs marks where beans will climb in the spring. He and the woman exchange a single word, soon, and the word carries leaf mold, seed, sun, and patience inside it. Near the gate, a small clay jar stands under a tile to keep off rain. When the woman lifts the lid, a sharp animal note arrives night soil, kept for flowers at the farthest bed where hollyhocks will rise against the wall. She tips no more than a ladle's worth, then buries it deep and pulls the dry edge over with the fork. This too is part of the truth of town gardens, though neighbors and clerks may prefer the quieter words. Regulations exist here and there distance from the well, a cover for pits, fines for careless spreading, but habit and care make the stronger rules. You smell no insult at the gate, only the damp sweetness of the heap doing its work. A blackbird drops to the path and considers the edge where worms have grown bold. The bird's breast smells of nothing you can name, only a bright sense of living. It draws one thread from the soil and flies to the quince with it, leaving the ground to settle itself after the small theft. The woman smiles without turning. The fork has the same smile built into its handle. In gardens, small thieves are counted among the crew. You trace the bed lines with your eye and notice how the heap's gifts have changed the soil. Near the heap, earth is the color of bread heel. Farther away, it turns paler, like a page sanded thin. The woman carries a basket and spreads a thin layer across the paler beds, working with a touch that suggests she is stroking rather than feeding the ground. The smell broadened by this act is warm and low, mushroom without mushroom, cellar without stone, rain without cold. You stand and breathe it slow, and your shoulders lower as if weight has learned to hide for a moment. A small bell tied to the gate rings once when a gust lifts it. The ring draws a chicken from the alley. The bird steps in with the confidence of someone paid in peelings. It pecks where the child placed melon rind and leaves tidy crescents behind. The garden permits the service. The child laughs, is shushed, then laughs quieter. The light leans, and the steam thins from the heap's crown. The woman plants 2 handfuls of garlic cloves along the path's edge, each pressed in with a thumb's worth of care. Some say cloves set on a waning moon keep better, and that planted at dusk they ride the night air inward and root deeper. Historians still argue whether such moon-wise planting guided ordinary town beds as firmly as country fields, and whether house gardens kept such rules, or simply planted when the pot and the sky both allowed. The woman neither agrees nor refuses. She plants because the cloves are ready and the ground is kind. The smell of crushed garlic skins lifts and fades into the brown breath of the heap. Before you go, she tops the heap with a thin shawl of leaves and a sprinkle of ash from yesterday's fire ash to sweeten what grows too eager, leaves to keep damp where it belongs. She plants the fork like a banner and wipes her hands on her apron. You step back through the gate, and it closes with a gentle groan that smells of rain and old hinges. In the lane, your sleeve keeps the garden for you. Leaf, damp, onion, sweet at the cuff, and that friendly, forest, deep smell of things turning into food by way of patience. The town has many loud truths. This corner keeps a quiet one. What went to supper returns to soil, and the soil remembers. You hear the smithy before you smell it, the low, patient bell of iron against iron, the hiss that follows like a thought completing itself in water. Then the air changes. A warm metal breath reaches your mouth and coats the tongue with a taste you know without a word, iron waking. Scaled dust fine as soot, a whisper of coal or charcoal folded into heat. The doorway stands wide, and within the dim you see the heart of the room, a shallow cave of coals with a core the color of sunset held too close, a pair of bellows on their hinges like leathern lungs, and a block of anvil that sits as if it grew there from the earth itself. The smith lifts a bar from the fire with tongs whose jaws bite without anger. The color slides along the iron dull cherry to peach, then a fuller glow, and the smell swings with it, brightening to that metallic tang that seems to stand the hairs inside your nose at attention. He lays the bar on the anvil. The first blow is a greeting, the second a decision, the third and fourth the beginning of shape. Each strike shakes a faint halo of scale that smells like warm dust mixed with rain on stone. The flakes land, skitter, and darken. Around the fire, the room's other notes assemble into a chord. Singed leather, quenched water turned momentarily to steam, oiled hinges, straw trampled flat near the door where hooves have waited their turn. You step so your body is a respectful distance from the heat. The smith's apprentice works the bellows with a rhythm that matches the hammer, a long pull, a measured push breath to heartbeat, flame to work. In many towns like this, the smithy is more constant than the market bell. Shoes for horses, hoops for casks, hooks and hasps, nails by the handful, hinges that decide how doors will sound for a generation. That is the plain fact scribes and travelers both keep repeating, perhaps because it refuses to become less true. A woman steps in with a kettle, whose bottom has grown tired at the seam. The smith tips it, studies the thinness with eyes that have learned to read metal as easily as words, and nods toward a bench. The kettle leaves a faint, clean tin smell behind, different from the iron's deeper voice. He will braise it later when the queue of hooves has thinned, and the day's heat can be turned to smaller, patient fires. The bench holds other waiting things: an axe head with a chip like a lost tooth, a ring bolt slick with old grease, a latch that squeals a little when shaken. The room smells of promises in the order they arrived. He returns to the bar and draws it under the hammer's face, lengthening the heat along the iron like butter pulled thin with a knife. The blow changes sound when the bar thins. Your ear understands the difference before your mind does. He rotates, strikes the arras, rotates again, smoothing corners to a round that will one day be a hinge pin. A quirky charm lives in some smithies beneath the anvil, a small iron nail driven into a scrap of wood with a muttered line to keep bends from breaking. Whether that charm holds the metal or the hand, no statute records. A scrap under this anvil does exist, blackened and forgotten looking. You do not ask what words it holds. The apprentice lowers the bar into the slack tub. The hiss rises, bright and short, throwing up a curl of steam that smells of iron pushed suddenly into the element that will not bend. A faint taste of mineral sits on your tongue as if you had licked a coin. When the steam thins, the shape is black again, wet, and wreathed with a smell like rain on a plow after a field's first pass. The smith nods, judges the straightness against his eye, and returns the piece to the fire at a cooler margin to temper its temper heat. Wait, watch the color run like a bruise that fades properly. Then, stillness. Against the far wall stands the shoeing stock, quiet for the moment. The floor beneath it keeps its own perfume, hoof pairings, a sour, sweet breath of hoof horn, and the smoky memory where hot shoe meets hoof to mark and fit. A farrier's rasp lying on a peg smells of shallow iron and horse, a scent that seems cleaner than it should be, as if the animal and the tool have learned to share a truce. A horse in the lane snorts and stamps once. The room answers with a clink of tongs. You have the sense that if you left and returned at any bell, the room would be in mid-breath, never caught with an empty chest. The fuel on the hearth speaks its own dialect, where wood charcoal rules. The fire smells sweet, a little like camp and kitchen grown stern. Where sea coal or pit coal has found its way into sacks, the smell turns heavier, bituminous, oily, a cling that rides your sleeve to the next street. Historians still argue whether coal had taken a strong hold in smithies like this by the end of the 15th century in towns away from the major seams, or whether charcoal kept its throne in places where wooded hills still answered the call. Contracts for coal and notes about coppice both survive. Your nose reports both possibilities in the ember's breath. Tools keep their own weather on the wrecks. Hammers smell of handle linseed in hand and of heads rubbed with a cloth after damp days. Fullers and sets carry the faint scent of oil that keeps their tempers honest. The hardy hole holds a small chisel that smells of the last red heat it knew. The vise near the door tastes of iron and dust, with a ghost of tar from the rope tied there months ago, for want of a finer cord. You discover that a workshop can be read by the nose as a ledger. Each tool writes a line when it is used, and another when it rests. A youth arrives with a wheel rim that has loosened its loyalty to the fellow. He and the smith measure the hoop and speak in half words, marking with chalk, nodding toward the yard. Outside, the smell opens greenish from damp oak, bright from heating iron soon to be set, and that thrilling, quick stink of scorched wood when the hot hoop is driven home. They lay the rim on a quenching ring, and when the new band is heated and hammered into place, water thrown from buckets bursts into white breath that smells of tree and nail marrying under pressure. The hiss is louder here, the steam taller, and neighbors drift closer as if the sound were a bell. Inside again, the smith returns to a smaller thing, a latch catch that will live its life unnoticed except when missed. He upsets one end, punches a neat hole with a drift, and peens it with taps that sound like punctuation. He cuts with a hearty, the short end dropping with a clink that you can taste. He lays the catch in a pan of warm ash to ease its cooling too quick. A chill would make it proud and brittle, and pride is a poor quality in a latch. That ash smells like yesterday's hearth and last week's bellows dust. A narrow shelf near the window holds powders in small cones, wrapped in scrap borax for brazing where coin permits, sand for stubborn joins, a pinch of salt sometimes thrown just to coax scale loose. A quirk of the shop keeps a sprig of yarrow tied by the window latch. The apprentice says, almost shyly, that it is for steady hands. Whether planned or practice keeps the hammer true, you cannot judge. The blows have not wandered since you arrived. Posters do not hang here, but a slate by the door keeps names. Promises due by next market day, a symbol for a favor owed, a line for the church hinge that must not squeal when winter comes. The slate smells of damp wool and dust. Even debts have a scent if they live among coals. A bowl beneath the slate holds clinkers, the fire's hard, glassy sins raked out each morning and kept for the road mender who likes them for hard patches. The bowl smells dead and hot at once, like stone that remembers lightning. The smith lifts the finished hinge pin and runs it through his fingers, listening more than looking. He rubs a bit of tallow along its length. The fat warms and releases that kitchen shadow smell that follows useful things in this town. He sets the pin aside with its pair and wipes his hands on a rag that could tell the story of a year in stains. A simple truth tilts the light in this room. When iron is right, it smells less. Heat shouts, finish whispers. The quiet now pleases your nose more than the first bright tang did. He quenches the last tool, and the tub answers with one modest sigh. The apprentice stops the bellows, and the fire lowers its voice without sulking. For a breath, the room holds only leather, dull iron, and old smoke in its rafters, wood creosote, tar, a sweetness that drifted here from a summer years ago, and never entirely left. You feel the calm that follows work done in the right order. When you step out, the lane meets you with cooler air. The smithy follows a few paces, the coin taste of iron, the ghost of coal, a faint animal warmth from the tallow on your sleeve where your hand brushed the rag. A horse waiting by the door turns an ear toward the shop and then toward you, as if to say the day will keep its hinges. The smell behind you settles back into the dark, ready to wake at the next hammer's lift. You drift toward the tanner's quarter by way of a narrow lane where the stones grow slick with something more than rain. The smell reaches you before the buildings do, low, thick, almost chewy on the air. It is not one scent, but a braid, the sour of soaked hides, the salt that rides them in from wherever they began, the sharp bite of tannin, and the damp animal note that clings to skin long after the animal is gone. It folds over the lane in layers, sometimes lifting with a breeze, sometimes lying so still it feels like a second atmosphere. The yard opens suddenly between tall plank fences, their slats darkened waist-high from years of splash and steam. Inside, wide vats sit in ranks, some brimming with opaque liquor the color of strong tea, others pale and cloudy, a few almost black. Men in rolled-up hose and bare forearms work poles as tall as themselves, stirring the hides that float and sink like slow creatures. The hides themselves smell of everything they have known: field, stable, salt, river, and now the liquor that will make them last. The plain fact is that tanning is among the oldest crafts to court both necessity and complaint. Towns need leather, and neighbors do not need the smell. To one side, fresh hides lie stacked, hair still on, edges stiff with drying salt. The salt smells like sea wind caught in wool, but beneath it lingers the musk of the animal. Flies work at the edges where the grain shows. A boy swats them away with a willow switch. He tips a skin to reveal a smear of lime where hair will be loosened. The lime's dry, chalky breath rising to join the rest. In the far vats, hides lie in bark, liquor, oak, chestnut, or whatever the tanner can bargain for. The tannin scent is astringent, woody, like tea that has gone bitter with waiting. The men haul the hides over beams, letting the liquor run back with a sound like slow applause. Quirky practice here keeps a bunch of mint tied to the stirring pole's top. Some say it spares the stirrer from the worst of the smell. Others that it warns anyone passing behind to mind the swinging pole. Whether the mint works for either purpose, the poles keep their green tassels in every season. Closer to the entrance, a beam house stands half in shadow. Here, hides are scraped on angled planks with curved knives, the hair falling in damp curls to the floor. That pile has its own pungency wool wet through, with the faint ammonia note of what clung to it. In some towns, such hair is carted off to be used in plaster or felt. In others, it simply goes to the midden. Historians still argue whether regulations on its disposal were more about health or about keeping peace between neighbors. Ordinances survive, but their motives blur like ink in rain. The beam house walls are splashed and streaked where hides have slapped or run off liquor. The smell here leans sharper flesh side newly revealed, knife edges working, lime washed away in buckets whose water darkens as it runs. In the corners, tools lean, scrapers, fleshing knives, a mallet for pegging hides to frames. The handles smell of bark oil and hand sweat, the blades of lime and fat. A trough along one wall carries away the day's wash, its trickle marked by a green line on the stones below. Near the back fence, a row of frames holds hides stretched taut to dry. The leather smells cleaner here, still tannic, but warmed by sun and lifted by air. Edges curl slightly. The tanner's apprentice walks the line, misting any that pull too fast. His bucket smells faintly of vinegar, used to temper the drying and keep the grain from stiffening into boards. On the ground beneath, shavings from trimming edges gather, lighter in scent but still holding the bark's ghost. These trimmings may find their way into shoe soles or book bindings, depending on size and firmness. In one corner, a small shed holds the tanning bark itself, piled in rough sacks. Oak bark smells strongest, sweet and bitter at once, with a dryness that clings to the back of your mouth. Chestnut carries more sweetness, alder a milder tone. The floor is dusted with fine brown powder that puffs when stepped on, catching in the air like smoke. Men fetch it by the scoop, the dust scent following them like a coat. By the fence gate, a table holds tools for finishing, slickers to polish, punches for straps, awls for stitching. The table smells faintly of oil, beeswax, and cut leather, an island of cleaner scents in a yard ruled by wet work. A finished bridle lies there, the leather rich and even in color, smelling of the bark more than the beast. This is the promise of the yard, that all this smell, all this soaking and scraping, ends in something meant to last. A man hauls a hide from the vat and drapes it over a beam. Liquor pours off, splattering the plank floor, each drop marking a darker circle on the wood. The beam surface smells of many years of hides, oily, woody, and faintly sour. He works a scraper over the surface, and each stroke sends a new breath upward, a reminder that leather is born by hand as much as by process. The boy with the willow switch pauses to watch you. His hair smells of the yard. There is no hiding from it. He grins, perhaps amused that you still stand easy in this air. Many do not. The smell clings to hair, wool, skin, and will follow you out the gate, announcing where you've been long after you leave. In some trades, the scent of work fades with the day. Here, it rides until the next. The tanner's wife passes with a basket of bark chips for the shed. She moves quickly, not because she hurries, but because the yard rewards speed. She nods toward the sunlit hides, proud of their even color. She will oil them later, bringing a new smell, fat, warmed by hand, sinking into grain. The change will be slow, but the air will notice. As you turn to go, the fence gives a creak that smells faintly of pitch and weather. The lane beyond seems sharper, cooler, though the smell of the yard will walk with you a while yet. It is the smell of necessity, disliked, argued over, regulated, but in a town of carts, boots, buckets, and belts, it is as constant as bread. You follow a lane where the air grows suddenly polite, as if the wind had washed its hands. A narrow doorway opens on your right, its lintel carved with a modest glove and ribbon. A smell meets you in the threshold that is not the street's softened leather first, then rosewater slipping in behind, then something darker and more animal, an undernote that holds the sweetness in place. You step inside, and the town's ash and tannery edge fall away. The shop is small, with a counter like a tidy table and shelves that keep pairs of gloves in folded ranks. Kid, lamb, a paler suede, arranged by size and season. A girl sets a shallow brazier on a brick tile and fans it with a folded card. The faintest smoke rises clean charcoal, barely a breath, and when she lifts a glove above the warmth, the scent opens like a book. Rose climbs first, honeyed and green. Then orange flower follows, brief and clear. Then civet's low, musky thread arrives and ties both together so they do not vanish too fast. The leather itself gives a rounded, milk-soft smell, as if sunshine had learned to be a hide. You stand still and let the layers settle on your tongue. Gloves here are not only to cover hands. That is a plain fact you can find in inventories and account books. Perfume gloves are common tokens and purchases in the later 15th and 16th centuries, stitched and scented by glovers who often work as perfumers too. Spain and Italy send fine skins. France learns to marry scent and leather as a trade. Noble households list dozens of pairs dressed, fringed, embroidered, perfumed, meant for gift and for use. Even modest towns keep a shop or a bench where kid is cut with a steady hand and steeped in waters that tame the rawness left by the tan. The room you stand in smells of that taming done well. The master glover sits near the window, tracing a pattern on pale kid with a point that leaves no ink, only intention. His fingers smell faintly of orris root, violet, dry and powdery, because he has lifted the jar more than once this morning. He pricks 3 small holes near the wrist where a ribbon will pass, then cuts without show. The blade's whisper against leather is as soft as a well-fed cat turning on a cushion. He lays the pieces aside in their order and reaches for a small wooden box. Inside lie little cloth heart sweet bags filled with spice and leaf. He tucks one into a glove cuff and pats it with 2 fingers so it lies flat. When the glove warms on a wrist, the bag will breathe a little clove, a little cinnamon, and a breath of rosemary. The smell will meet the wearer each time the hand rises. On the shelf behind the counter stand small glass phials and glazed pots, each wearing a paper collar: aqua rosarum, aqua nefe, orange flower, muscus, ambra, benzoin. A jar of civet sits higher, clay stoppered, its rim wrapped with waxed linen against escape. When the stopper lifts, a single rumor of the beast's perfume reaches you, dank and feline, oddly clean in its persistence. It is not sweet by itself. The glover uses the smallest of drops, barely a thought, rubbed between fingers with oil or spirit before touching leather. The drop lends weight to flowers, length to citrus, quiet to spice. You witness the arithmetic of smell. Strong things measured into gentleness. He takes a finished pair from a tray lined with paper. The paper holds faint circles where oil kissed it in drying. He sets the gloves over the low warmth again to wake their memory, then cups each one as if listening for the tone it gives back. The scent answers differently in each one: brighter with bergamot peel, one softer with violet and orris, one warmer with benzoin that smells like sap made calm. A fringe habit in some houses keeps a pair under the pillow so that hair and sheets take a modest share of the perfume in sleep. The idea is half comfort, half thrift. Whether it works more on dreams or on linen cannot be proved at the counter, but the glover smiles when you mention it and says nothing to disagree. He brings out a shallow tray of cut shapes awaiting stitch thumbs, like small leaves, fingers like pale tongues, quirks that bridge finger and palm. The edges feel cool and fine under your hand. A spool of silk thread rests in a porcelain bowl with a scrap of beeswax. The thread runs once across the wax before it meets the needle, so it will draw smooth and not saw at the leather. The bowl smells faintly of hive. A woman at the end of the counter sets her needle with quiet certainty and bites the thread to finish the seam. The bite smells of linen and work. On a low shelf sits a wooden mold shaped like a hand, jointed at the knuckles. A glove goes over it to be coaxed into exactness. The seams encouraged flat with a warm iron as thin as a tongue. The fingers eased to their length, the wrist taught to curve. A cloth damp with rosewater passes under the iron now and then, and its breath rises as a gentle cloud that carries the room's intention toward your face. The iron leaves no shine, only the absence of wrinkle. When the glove leaves the hand, it looks already familiar with a human wrist. Historians still argue whether sweetening gloves began chiefly to conquer the strong odors left by tanning, or chiefly to make gloves carry status and charm in their own right. The truth likely braids the two. Some guild rules from larger towns knit gloving and perfumery together, and letters praise gifts of scented gloves as politely as they praise poems. Recipes survive, but they disagree. Borrowing freely from apothecaries and kitchens alike, rose macerated in spirit, orange peel steeped in wine, musk and civet married to oil, ambergris dissolved as if the sea had learned to be syrup. Which combinations belong to which streets, which seasons, which purses remains a patchwork. The nose must mend each time a glove warms. A customer arrives with a hat plume that smells faintly of rain and goose. He asks for a small bottle of glove water to trickle on his lining. The glover measures a spoon of rose, a spoon less of orange flower, 2 drops of civet rubbed with a little oil, and a ribbon of benzoin tincture for calm. He pours the mixture into a small glass with a cork and ties it off with a thread. The cork has the low oak smell of cask and river. He writes a neat label and seals it with wax that breathes resin when it softens. The customer lifts the bottle, and the room glows a little warmer for the moment the cork is free. On the wall hangs a narrow case with slivers of scented paste pomanders pressed into little medallions. Some are studded with clove. Some are smooth and kept in cloth. A fringed tidbit says a slice of orange studded with cloves sealed inside a glove cuff stops bad airs at the wrist and keeps the wearer steady in crowded lanes. Whether cloves defend against breath or against worry, the glove cuff holds the scent with a pleased patience. 2 girls try on small pairs and press their noses against their own wrists. Their laughter smells like lemon, sugar, and wool. From the back, the glover brings a ledger that keeps names and sizes. He adds a mark beside a familiar hand that orders a dozen pairs for winter gifts. The page smells faintly of gum, Arabic, and iron gall. A sprig of dried lavender lies between 2 leaves, its color faded to gray-blue. When he moves it, the air lifts a last sigh of summer and then returns to leather. He shows you a pair stitched with tiny slits at the knuckles for bending. He spreads the hand, and you see how the cut follows the finger's logic. He speaks little. The glove speaks when it opens and closes. He dusts the inside with a little orris so it will slide on without complaint, and so a dry, violet echo will rise when the glove is removed. Some houses keep a dish of starch and orris powder by the door in winter. Wrists dipped into the bowl before gloves will carry a polite breath into the street and keep the lining from remembering too much of the day. Quirky, perhaps, but the dish smiles on the shelf as if it knows it is useful. You linger by the threshold while the girl warms one last pair. She draws the glove from the brazier's mild breath and shakes it once. The scent blooms and then settles as if it has found its chair. You breathe in, and the town's harsher notes fall back. Tannery becomes bark and memory. Smoke becomes hearth and bread. The river becomes stone and reed. The glove does not erase the town. It arranges it. When you step into the lane again, the air seems cooler and more ordinary. Yet your sleeve carries rose's bright shadow and civet's small, steady anchor. The scent moves with you like a soft thought. A passerby turns slightly, not to stare, but to recognize a shop without seeing it. This is the glove's secret work: to let hands speak gently to the day and to teach the day to answer in kind. You walk toward the water's edge, where the town smell changes again, not fading, but spreading wider, drawn out by the tide. The quay stretches in a long, uneven line, planks silvered by salt and sun, ropes dark with tar, and stone steps worn slick from centuries of boots and barrels. Here, the air is a weave, the cold brine of the sea itself, the warm salt of drying fish, the faint sweetness of pitch from freshly caulked seams, and the sour tang of bilge that never quite leaves the boats. Seagulls call overhead, their voices sharp enough to cut the heavier smells into ribbons. A fisherman stands by a low table, gutting his catch with the rhythm of someone who could do it in the dark. The smell is immediate, bright, metallic from the blood, sharp and green from the stomach contents spilling onto the planks, and deep from the oil in the skin. The plain fact is that fishmongers and their kin are part of the daily breath of any port town. And while markets may be cleaned before a feast day, the scent here never leaves entirely. It dries into the wood, settles in rope, and softens only when the wind changes. Nearby, barrels of herring are open to the sun, each fish laid in a spiral with coarse salt packed between. The salt crackles faintly as it draws out moisture, a sound you can almost smell mineral, cold and bracing. A boy leans into a barrel to check the level, his hair catching the brine scent. He grins when a gull hops too close and chases it off with a half-hearted flap of his arms. The gull leaves a single white feather behind, which smells faintly of salt and nothing else. Coopers work along the edge, the smell of their trade different from the sea's fresh oak staves, dampened for bending, pine resin for sealing seams, and the smoky breath of a small fire used to heat the wood. One barrel lies on its side, still warm from the shaping. smelling like a forest made patient. Into it will go fish or wine or pitch, and in a week the barrel will smell entirely different. A fringe custom here has coopers chalk their initials inside the lid before sealing. Some say it's pride, others say it's a silent bargain for the barrel's safe return. Whether anyone truly checks is another matter. On the far end of the quay, nets are spread out to dry on low racks. The nets smell of everything they have touched: seaweed, fish oil, the faint decay of shells, and the tar used to strengthen the rope. Sun warms the tar until it softens, and its scent rises like a slow tide, sticking faintly to the back of your throat. Beside the nets, a pile of cork floats smells faintly of the trees they came from, though the sea has begun to give them its own perfume. The tide pool below the steps holds its own private air: iodine from kelp, the mineral note of wet stone, and a sweetness from tiny snails clinging in clusters. Children lean over with sticks, stirring up clouded water that smells briefly sharper when disturbed. One girl lifts a crab, which smells of both sand and the faint rust of its shell. She drops it back with a splash, and the smell returns to its calmer blend. Historians still argue whether the steady smell of fish and salt in port towns was simply tolerated as the cost of trade, or actively celebrated as proof of a town's prosperity. Some records praise the honest smell of a busy quay. Others note complaints lodged on hot days when barrels burst or fish lay too long in the sun. Both may be true, as the nose can change its mind depending on the purse and the season. A merchant ship is being unloaded 2 piers away, and the air shifts again as its cargo opens. Sacks of spice send out dry whispers of cinnamon and pepper, mingling oddly with the brine. A bale of dyed wool smells like the sheep it once wore, with a bright overlay of madder and woad. Nearby, a crate of dried fruit gives off a dusty sweetness that is almost hidden under the sharper scents. Dock workers move among these shifting clouds without remark, as if their noses have learned to step around them. At the water's edge, a man boils pitch in a low cauldron for sealing hull seams. The pitch bubbles thickly, sending up a smell of smoke and resin so dense it seems to coat the inside of your mouth. He skims the surface with a wooden paddle, and the cooled scrap peels away with a sweet bitter scent that clings to the paddle's grain. Behind him, a stack of spare oars smells of oak and old salt, ready to take on the sea's breath when next used. A small tavern near the quay door keeps its windows open to the salt air. Inside, the smells of ale, fried fish, and wood smoke lean out into the street, catching in the folds of passing cloaks. A fisherman ducks in, trailing the day's work behind him. When he leaves, the tavern's warmth tries to follow him into the wind. You catch both at once and know the town by them. By the time you turn back toward the inner streets, the smell of the quay has settled into your hair and clothes. It is not unpleasant, but it marks you as surely as any guild badge. A cat slinks from behind a barrel, nose high, reading your path in the air. The water laps against the pilings with a smell that has no name beyond its own sea, as it was before the town, sea as it will be after. You walk with it until the cobbles take you back. You follow the winding lane inland, where the air feels thicker, as though it has taken on the weight of the afternoon. The street narrows between 2 long rows of timbered houses, their upper stories leaning forward like old friends trying to hear one another. Shadows pool along the cobblestones, and in the dimness, the smell of the town shifts again, no longer salt and fish from the quay, but a denser mix of food, hearth, smoke, and the slow, damp breath of enclosed spaces. You pass under a small stone arch where the smell concentrates. Somewhere nearby, meat is roasting, the fat dripping into a pan with a hiss that sends up a rich, savory perfume. Over it lies the tang of vinegar, probably from a pot of stewing cabbage or onions. The plain fact is that vinegar was as common in a Renaissance kitchen as bread, not only for cooking but for keeping meat from spoiling too soon. Here, it sharpens the air, making the meat's richness feel even heavier. In a courtyard just beyond, a woman is stirring a cauldron set over an open flame. The steam carries barley's earthy sweetness, mixed with the faint bitterness of greens chopped into the broth. She tosses in a pinch of dried herbs from a linen pouch, thyme, perhaps, or savory, and their scent blooms before melting into the stew. A fringe tidbit holds that in some towns, neighbors judged the thrift and skill of a household by how the alley smelled at mealtimes, though whether this was admiration or quiet gossip is left for you to guess. Beside the cauldron, a low table is spread with trenchers of coarse bread. The bread smells faintly sour from the leavening, its crust holding the charred scent of the oven floor. The oven itself squats at the courtyard's far edge, a dome of clay and brick still warm from the morning's baking. The door is open, and the air inside is thick with the ghost of hundreds of loaves past flour, ash, and the faint musk of wheat ground weeks ago. Across the lane, another doorway releases the scent of drying herbs. Bundles hang from the rafters. Rosemary, sharp as pine. Sage with its soft and almost dusty smell. Lavender, faint and sweet. Beneath them, bunches of garlic swing gently when someone walks by, each clove giving off a slow, pungent note. The floor smells faintly of spilled oil, and a cat lies on a folded sack, twitching its nose as if choosing which scent to dream about. Historians still argue whether Renaissance towns regulated cooking smells to maintain order, or whether they simply accepted that narrow streets would carry every kitchen into every neighbor's life. Ordinances survive for bakers and butchers, often about fire, safety, or waste, but the rules about air are harder to trace. Some suggest that the mingling of scents was part of the town's shared identity. Others see it as constant competition for whose household could make the most tempting air. You move further along, and the smells change in smaller steps. A burst of yeast from a brewing cask, the faint metallic tang of a blacksmith's shop where a shoe is cooling in a trough, the sweet heaviness of honey cakes cooling on a window ledge. Two boys dart past carrying a tray of pies wrapped in cloth. When one corner slips open, steam escapes, smelling of apple and spice. The cloth catches that scent and will hold it until the pies are gone. Past a narrow doorway, a man is grinding something with a mortar and pestle. The stone on stone makes a low, steady sound, and the air around him smells of pepper, sharp enough to tickle the back of your throat. He pauses to sweep the powder into a folded paper, tapping the edges so it lies neat. Behind him, other jars hold cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg warm smells that make the small room seem larger. A fringe belief says pepper kept the mind alert, while cinnamon kept the heart steady. Whether or not this is true, both keep the purse lighter, for they travel far and cost dearly. By the time you reach the lane's end, the light has shifted toward gold, and the smells have softened, blending into one another. Smoke from the cooking fires rises just high enough to catch the sun, carrying a haze of roasted meat, herbs, and bread into the evening sky. The cobblestones beneath your feet still hold the earlier damp, but now they also carry a faint warmth from the day's passing sun. Somewhere, a bell begins to ring, slow and deliberate, and the sound seems to thread itself into the smells as if to remind the town it is time to gather at table. You pause in the arch of another doorway and take a long breath. The air here is not entirely pleasant, nor entirely unpleasant. It is layered, full, and alive. Every household, every shop, every hearth has left its mark, and together they write the smell of a town at the edge of evening. It is a scent that will change by morning, but will never be new. The sun has slipped low enough that the shadows have lengthened into threads, weaving through the lanes and over the rooftops. You take the path toward the outskirts, where gardens and small plots open the streets to the evening air. Here, the smells loosen, spreading farther apart, no longer compressed between walls and timber. You can taste the difference cooler, greener, yet still touched by the town you have left behind. The first garden you pass belongs to a household that grows cabbage and leeks in neat rows. The earth is dark and smells of recent watering, with the faint sour edge of rotting leaves turned under for compost. Cabbage holds its own smell, green, heavy, and a little sharp, especially when the day has been warm. Leeks bring something milder, a clean onion note that drifts low to the ground. The plain fact is that kitchen gardens were common wherever space allowed, their scents mingling with those of pens and coops kept close by. You turn down a lane lined with small wooden sheds. The nearest one holds a pen of pigs, and the air here thickens again, animal warmth, damp straw, the unmistakable note of manure. Flies hover, but not in great number. A boy comes out with a bucket of scraps, and the pigs greet him with low grunts that carry their own warm, musky breath. A fringe tidbit says pigs, kept well fed and penned, smelled less than goats, though not all noses agree. The scent here is not sharp, but it lingers like a heavy coat you cannot quite take off. Further on, the road dips toward a narrow stream. The water smells faintly metallic, a mingling of soil and stone. At its edge, laundry has been set out on bushes to dry wool tunics, linen shirts, the faint smell of lye soap drifting from their damp folds. Some pieces have been rinsed in scented water, a luxury not every household can afford. When the breeze shifts, you catch a trace of lavender and marjoram. Historians still argue whether such scents were meant purely for pleasure, or if people believed they kept moths and vermin away from stored clothing. Near the stream, an older woman kneels beside a row of herbs, sage, rue, and tansy, plucking leaves into a basket. Sage smells soft and dry, almost dusty, while rue brings a bitter, medicinal edge. Tansy gives off a strong, almost camphor-like note. She pauses to shake the dirt from her hands, releasing the smell of soil warmed all day in the sun. Behind her, a small orchard stands in neat rows, the last of the season's apples sending up a faint sweetness from wind-fallen fruit on the ground. You follow the path that skirts the orchard, where a low fence holds a flock of geese. They hiss softly as you pass, their feathers smelling faintly of water and grass. A wooden trough holds stale bread soaking in milk. The smell is warm, faintly sour, and edged with the sweetness of grain. Beyond the geese, a chicken coop adds its own sharper scent, drier, dustier, with a tang of feathers and feed. The breeze shifts again, carrying smoke from a charcoal mound being tended on the far side of the field. The smell is deep and woody, as if the forest itself has been reduced to a steady ember. Charcoal burning leaves a cleaner scent than raw wood smoke, less resinous, more mineral, and it clings to the air without stinging the eyes. A man with a long pole turns the mound's cover of earth and turf, letting out a puff of darker smoke before sealing it again. As you walk, the sounds grow fewer, the smells more open. A patch of wildflowers at the edge of the path releases a last faint perfume to the evening: chamomile, clover, and something sharper you cannot name. The air cools further, and with it the stronger scents begin to flatten, leaving only the earth, the green of grass, and the far-off tang of wood smoke from the town behind you. You pause at a low hill, looking back. From here, you can almost map the town by its smells: the tanneries' bitter weight, the quay's salt and fish, the kitchen's warm blend of bread and meat, the sharper lines of herbs and vinegar. Over it all, the evening draws a thin, cool veil, but nothing is hidden entirely. The town breathes as one great body, and you have followed its breath from the river's edge to the last garden. In the grass beside you, a cluster of mint releases its scent under your heel, fresh, green, almost startling after the weight of the day. It is a reminder that not every smell is a mixture. Some are as clear and simple as a single leaf crushed between your fingers. You stand for a while in that clarity before the path calls you onward, toward the last stretch of the day. The path bends once more, leading you to the far edge of the town's reach, where the open fields begin. Here, the air loosens entirely, no longer pressed into layers by walls, no longer mixed by narrow lanes, but the memory of the town still follows, faint and worn, like a scent carried in the lining of a cloak. The grass stretches in low waves, brushed by the wind, and with each step the smells grow cleaner, though never empty. Ahead, a cluster of hayricks stands against the fading sky. The hay breathes a dry sweetness, the kind that catches in the throat if you breathe too deeply. It is the scent of summer stored for winter-cut grass warmed by the sun, straw turned in the field, and a faint echo of flowers that grew among the blades. The plain fact is that hay was the quiet currency of rural life, traded, stored, and guarded as carefully as grain, for without it, the animals would thin before spring. Its smell is as much assurance as it is memory. A narrow ditch runs alongside the field, holding water that moves so slowly it seems almost still. The air above it is cooler, carrying the green, slightly sour smell of algae, mixed with the damp earth at its edges. A frog slips into the water as you pass, leaving behind the faint, mineral scent of disturbed mud. Across the ditch, a man is cutting willow switches, the fresh-cut wood giving off a sharp green tang that is almost citrus. A fringe tidbit says willow bark brewed into tea could ease aches, though the taste was bitter enough to make the cure a small trial. Beyond the willows, The land dips toward a meadow grazed by cattle. The animal's smell reaches you before the sound of their lowing, warm, solid, edged with the musk of hides and the sweetness of grass they've just eaten. The ground underfoot is soft from their passing, and the air carries a faint dust that smells of hooves and soil. A calf, not long weaned, noses at its mother's flank, releasing the milky smell that lingers in the folds of her skin. Historians still argue whether the balance of field and town was a matter of deliberate planning or simple necessity. But either way, the air here tells the truth of their closeness. Even on the edge of open land, you cannot entirely leave the town's breath behind. Wood smoke drifts faintly from chimneys you can no longer see. And somewhere far off, a tannery's sharper edge rides the breeze in a thread so thin it could be imagined. A shepherd passes with a small flock of sheep, their wool smelling of lanolin and the day's sun. He carries a crook, the wood polished smooth where his hand grips it, and the faint scent of sheep's milk clings to his cloak. As he passes, you catch a trace of rosemary tied into the fleece of the lead ewe, a practice some claim keeps insects away, though it may just as easily be habit. The scent lingers after the flock is moved on, mixing with the hay and the open grass. Farther on, the path rises to a low ridge. From here, the whole valley opens before you, a patchwork of tilled soil, pasture, and scattered trees. The air on the ridge is cooler, touched by the faint resin of a stand of pines nearby. When the breeze turns, the town's smells return in a softened form. Bread, now only a suggestion. Fish reduced to a salt shadow. Leather and smoke folded into something like memory. You sit for a while on a flat stone at the ridge's crest. The stone is warm from the day's sun, and it smells faintly of lichen and dust. In the grass around you, small insects stir, releasing the dry, almost peppery scent of crushed stalks. The light begins to fade fully now, and with it the air grows still. Even the smells of the open field seem to settle, as if the land itself is closing its eyes. When you finally rise to return, you take one last slow breath. It is neither the pure air of open land nor the dense air of the market lanes. It is both, threaded together in a way that belongs only to this place. A town smell is never single. It is the sum of kitchens and fields, of work and waste, of what is kept and what is thrown away. Tonight, it is the scent of a day nearly done, of wood smoke resting low over the roofs, of hay standing dry against the dusk, of earth and stone cooling beneath the first stars. You follow the path back toward the town, carrying its breath in yours. You walk slowly now, not to arrive, only to provide your feet with something gentle to do while the sky closes. Sound becomes cloth-muffled hooves, a late hinge, a ladle's quiet tap, and the air seems to lower its voice so you can hear your own breathing take longer paths. You pass the gate, and the gate does not insist upon itself. Stone keeps its cool, iron keeps its memory, and your hand passes near without asking for proof. The town, which has been a chatter of kitchens and trades all day, loosens into a single, even exhale. You match it. Smoke lies near the roofs like a shawl someone has set down and forgotten. Bread's last echo turns thin and brown sweet. River moves without sentence. Leather relaxes. Soap gives only a pale, clean edge, almost the absence of smell. You stand where two lanes cross and find that nothing presses, no tannin, no brine, no vinegar rising to make a point. Things drift instead. Rosemary's last, a trace of horse, a note of warm wood deep as a yawn. The stones under you keep a cool cap for night, and your heel, when it shifts, releases only dust and the idea of rain. You imagine shutters settling, herbs tied above water jars, a broom leans soft against a wall. You picture pairs of tapers tested and snuffed, a mashed tune lid rested with both palms, a pigeon counting its own heartbeat under feather. The town does not ask you to remember every recipe and rule. It asks you to let them blur into a kindness you can breathe without sorting. You do so, and the lanes approve. If there is a center to this evening, it is only the pace unhurried, sameness made gentle, a second person singular, moving through a place that smells like itself. You let what is heavy lower itself to the floor of you. You let what is light make a small weather across your face. You open the door that is not a door and go in where sleep keeps its quiet bench. The town waits outside, folded, unsurprised. It will be itself in the morning. For now, you are allowed to be softer than you were. End of script. Sweet dreams.